Fantastic. You're on tonight. You're going to tell us the most compelling story about your family and their escape from Lithuania. Is that correct?
My father, who was Polish actually, but he went to Vilna, and from there he got the visa to get out of Europe.
It's an amazing, remarkable story. And a few minutes ago, Dan and I just got an email from some...
He wrote a whole book about it.
Amazing. But we just got an email from some people in America who saw an advert for tonight, and they are the descendants of Sukihara survivors themselves, and they've written us an entire story. We've asked them if they'd like to come on for a few minutes tonight, but they were so amazed and so grateful that we'd be celebrating Sukihara this evening. And in fact, there's a Sukihara yacht site coming up, Tali. When is it? 31st of July, is it?
Absolutely. That's his yacht site, yes, next week.
Really?
So fortuitous time that in fact we do.
I must wish Nabuki long life.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So we have some beautiful pictures, and you will see when we show the pictures of you, Rabbi Goldman, I found a Hasidic singer who sings a song called Japan in Yiddish, and we have put your photos to this Yiddish song called Japan.
Never heard it.
Tonight you are going to be culturally enriched in Hasidic music by, of all people, me.
But I assume it's called Japan.
Probably Japan indeed. So Dr. Gavron, tell us, you've been traveling around Europe at the moment. Is this holiday, or is this in fact part of work?
It's part of holiday. In fact, I live between two cities, Krakow and Prague. So I'm at home in Prague right now. It's not really like traveling for fun. I mean, because this is still, kind of a little bit restricted, but it's the summer break.
So what is the COVID status at the moment in the Czech Republic and in Poland?
So the situation seems to be under control. We still have a significant number of cases given the recent approval, but we have kind of normal life. There are some restrictions regarding the wearing face masks. The daily number of cases, it's between 100 and 400 in these two countries.
So we yesterday were on 13,940, if I'm not mistaken, just under 14,000, a tad under 14,000 new cases in one single day. And we're probably still not testing enough. So it's very, very worrisome where we are in the world at the moment. So for everyone watching us, please make sure you're keeping your social distance. This is not the time to think that this doesn't apply to you, and wear your masks at all times. This is the way we're going to stay safe during this period.
Absolutely.
And Tali, tell us about your Shabbos.
It was very restful, as Rabbi Goldman said. A very, very lovely day, a warm day for Johannesburg. So it was lovely. And I'm so happy to join in this evening's webinar with the Jewish Report, the best newspaper, weekly in South Africa.
So Tali, I agree with you 100%, but I'm looking behind you and I see the most beautiful samovar.
Yes, yes.
Please tell us about that.
It's my treasure. You see behind you a Yossele Bergman painting. That is my treasure. I got it for my wedding some years ago. And the samovar that I bought just after we got married from a Russian that immigrated to South Africa and decided to part with the samovar. I love it. It's absolutely gorgeous.
So I think many people watching may have seen a samovar, but they probably have no idea how to use it. Have you ever used that one?
I tried, but as an antique from the 19th century, it has some pieces missing. So I did try, but the tea was just not warm enough. So now it just graces my dining room and I enjoy looking at it and sort of hugging it every now and again. But it is a gorgeous piece. A gorgeous
Should I
piece.
ask one difficult question? How do you keep it clean or
With
polished?
great difficulty, yeah. We basically shine it every month, and with a lot of love and care. We love this piece.
Dina,
But what I want to know is, Adita, your books, the book collection is unbelievable. Tell us about that.
Yes, that's David's, my partner's book collection, which is thousands of books in this apartment. Every room is filled with books, and I'm having the Central European section of the library, home library, just behind me.
And what titles, what are the sort of the themes of that library?
So it's not one theme only. It's very wide spectrum of books. It's history, it's philosophy, it's literature from all around the world. I think we have also some South African books. It's like a treasure.
Wow. Well,
Aditya,
amazing.
next time you appear on one of our shows, we're going to make sure that we test you on the South African literature.
Okay.
Dina Diamond, guten Tag to you.
Good work, good work.
How was your Shabbos?
So yeah, very restful. Again, these days, I think it has to be restful because we've got limited options. So we're not cooking for tons of people. We're not entertaining. So we're entertaining our families. We're playing board games. We're going for walks. So all the stuff kind of that you like forget about sometimes, it actually is really good.
So good quality time. You do not have a series of books behind you. You have some curtains.
I don't. I've got Google.
You do know your entire credibility on Zoom depends on the bookcase behind you.
I know. But the reception by my bookcase actually is not great, so you won't be seeing that. But I do actually wonder, I know we've also seen so many amazing bookcases behind people, again, also through the webinars. My question is, in the next 20 to 30 years, are we going to be seeing those bookcases? Because everyone's got Kindles these days. A lot of people rely on sort of electronic books. So it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves.
So what is your preference, an electronic book or a physical hard book?
So I actually have to tell you that I prefer a physical book. So I am properly old school. I like to touch and I like to feel a book. I like to be able to turn the pages. I like to be able to not have to check if it's been charged or not. So I actually do like a real physical book, which is difficult.
I have
my book club's on Kindle.
Great difficulty when you're trying to turn down the page to mark your place on a Kindle. Not so easy.
Yeah, not so easy. They should do something like that for people who like that.
Danny Kedar, this is in fact your debut on one of our programs, but you're the man who behind the scenes has been doing such amazing work, making sure all the adverts get out, making sure the design work is done. Danny, welcome. Lovely to see you.
Thanks, Howard. Nice to, who would think that such would be my debut, but it's nice to join everyone. Good work, everyone. Hope everyone had a relaxing Shabbos. Thank you for such kind work. Rabbi Goldman, hello, miss you. Seeing you on Shabbos. How's everyone doing?
Well, I'm just very grateful now that we've been talking about samovars that Mel Kerr has in fact just sent me a beautiful picture of his samovar at home. I'm amazed there are so many people who seem to have samovars. It's absolutely fantastic. So just a huge welcome. I see Carl Wilkins has joined us as well. Carl, welcome. Lovely to see you this evening. Where are you joining us from?
Good evening. Thanks for the invite. Spokane, Washington, up here in the Pacific Northwest of the United States.
And what is the weather up there? We are told it's always rainy and drizzly. Is that true?
Well, Washington State's a pretty sizable state. And Seattle does have that reputation on the west side of the state. But you come over the Cascade Mountains and into the Palouse wheatlands, and we've got sunny, gorgeous summers. Really, temperatures, oh boy, I should try to talk Celsius to you. Sorry, I can't do that. But we got temperatures in the 80s last week. Actually, I think we hit 90, but very low humidity. We love summer here in Spokane.
Amazing. Is that where you grew up?
Senior year of high school. Moved here my senior year of high school back in 75. And so it's been home since then, but the first 17 years were on the East Coast, Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and a little bit, if I could call a little bit of my childhood, 20 to 21 in Butterworth outside in the Transky.
No way. Tell us about that.
I was sick and tired of college and I needed a break. And so fortunately, our university had a service learning program, and I volunteered at a little high school outside of Butterworth from, what was it? Most of the fall of when was that? That was back when I was 21. So that must have been around like the fall of 78 to the fall of 70, to the spring of 70, summer 79, about a year. I fell in love with the wild coast there on the Transky. My goodness, hitchhiked during Easter break. Hitchhiked up to what was then Rhodesia. I had quite a year.
Well, that sounds amazing. Tell us about your favorite memories of South Africa.
Well, probably the wild coast would be part of it in terms of location. But the people, I just had so much fun with all of the different people there, the hospitality. And of course, we Americans were really enamored with the accents and the graciousness and openness. It really was, I'd read about Africa as a kid, mostly missionary stories and stuff. And now to come to South Africa, we fell in love with the people. I finished my degree and went back to my new bride and I, 6 weeks after getting married, moved into Zimbabwe in 1981, and subsequently Zambia and subsequently Rwanda. So South Africa was the first introduction to the continent for us, and we really felt fortunate for that experience.
Where else have you lived in the world?
Well, those 4 countries there in Africa, and 6 months in France trying to learn French before going to Rwanda in 1989. But then most of the rest of the time, since 96 back here in the US, going on trips, of course, but always based in the US for the last 24 years.
Wow, that's a remarkable.
But Carl is traveling a lot and teaching all around the world. And we were very fortunate to have you here again in October of last year, Carl. It's so lovely to see you again.
Thank you, Tali. It's really nice to see you again. And when you contacted me and Howard, I was like, yeah, any chance? I had such a wonderful time there last October, the center in Durban, and then with you folks in Johannesburg, and then in Cape Town. I was really, I felt so spoiled and so many new wonderful memories. So I'm excited about our conversation today.
So Carl, tell us, the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, does that feature very heavily in people's kind of mindset when they think of Africa, or when you go around and you tell your personal story and the story of the genocide? Do you find people know the basics, or is this news to many of them?
It's an ebb and flow. Early on, I first started talking about it kind of on a regular basis in 2004, 16 years ago. And a documentary came out at that time called Ghost of Rwanda, kind of combination with American PBS and the BBC. And that's still available on YouTube. So if somebody wants a background, that's a pretty in-depth 2-hour, really hard watch, but very valuable. And so that was beginning to open the door. And then, of course, a Hollywood movie comes along like Hotel Rwanda. And that opens the door even broader. So schools I would go to, kids would know about it because of Hotel Rwanda. But then, Hotel Rwanda, I think, came out around 2004 or 5 too. And since then, it's lost. And what's really exciting to me now, I was talking to a group not so long ago, and the young man, these kids were like about maybe 15 years old in the San Francisco Bay Area. And one of the kids says, I understand Rwanda is the technical and financial hub there in the center of Africa. How did that happen? And I was so excited that for him, he wasn't talking about genocide. He was a tech kid, I guess, probably from the Bay Area. And he had studied about Rwanda. And that reinventing of itself is what really gives me so much fire in my veins. talking about the genocide is super important, and it's something we all have to. That truth telling, you know, our friend Brian Stevenson would just keep using that word. That truth telling, so important. But the truth is growing. I mean, new truth, new realities. Rwanda is really reinventing itself, from my perspective.
That's amazing. And it is remarkable that it has become the tech hub of Africa, something that we in South Africa should be enormously jealous of. The time is 2 minutes to 8. We're going to go live in 4 minutes time. We want to welcome everyone who's joined us this evening. We have a huge crowd tonight. In fact, more than 1,600 people have already registered for this evening's event. And I see we have about 200 people logged in on Zoom. We are about 1,500 people. We're about 1,500 people on Zoom. We're a few hundred already on YouTube. So we're expecting an enormously large audience tonight, and we'd like to welcome everyone in our audience. And as usual, we'd love to know where in the world you are. So please use the chat button at the bottom. Say good evening to us. Say Guten Woch for those who kept Shabbat. Tell us where in the world you are. We'd love to hear from you. So please, in the chat, let us know where in the world you are. So Tali, you probably watched, we interviewed one of the stars of Fauda on Thursday evening, and it was amazing to see where in the world people actually tuned in from. So let me actually give you the stats. So we can only pull the stats of Zoom, we can't off YouTube, but we had Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, France, Greece, India, Israel, Italy, Mexico, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, United States of America, Pakistan. It is amazing that our webinars are in fact watched from all over the world. So really,
silver lining, silver lining of Corona brought us all together from around the world. That is really heartening, yeah.
So I'm just looking at the chat as it comes in, where people are telling us where they're from and wishing us all good evening. And we say hello to Aubrey and Etienne in Toronto. I see we've got people in New York. We got people in Louisville, Kentucky. We've got Aviva from Johannesburg, people in Belito, which is near Durban. So we've got Karen Daniel in Toronto in Canada, people in Israel, some Cape Town people, Lindsay Carnes in Johannesburg. We've got people in Delaware in the USA, Nir Eliyahu in Israel, Debbie Mayers is in Cape Town, and we have Shavua Tov from Lindy in Johannesburg, people watching in Houston, Texas, lots of people in Florida, in the United States, and Durban. So let us know. I see so many messages coming in. Let us know where in the world you are. We are going to say goodbye to some of our panelists. We're going to turn off your videos, and we are going to bring you back a little later on in this broadcast. So Dina, Danny, welcome to you. Dan Stillerman, good evening, guten Woch. Nice to see you. Let's turn your microphone on. Guten Woch.
Hello, Howie. Hello, panelists. Hello, audience.
Dan, did you have some nice colors this Shabbos?
Did I have some nice?
Colors, some babka, you know, the usual.
I had some ra challah. It was good. I had some relaxation, some walking. Yeah, no, it was great, eh?
Well, good to see you, and I think we've got a remarkable evening planned. So on behalf of the South African Jewish Report, want to welcome everyone this evening. We're expecting a full house. We are nearly 1,000 people on Zoom, or 1,000 logins, over 2,000 people on Zoom, and many more hundreds on YouTube. So as soon as, in fact, Zoom fills up, which is 1,000 people, we'll be sending everyone onto YouTube. But a huge welcome to all of you. Guten Woch. We hope you had a good Shabbos, for those people who keep Shabbat. And we are going to start off on a remarkable journey tonight. Tali Nates, this is a partnership between the South African Jewish Report and the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. I cannot praise the Johannesburg Genocide and Holocaust Center enough. The work that you're doing in educating school kids, in educating adults, the exhibitions that you're having, the programs that you're running, you are bringing the issue of the Holocaust alive to really tens of thousands of students every year. But more important, you're teaching lessons about racism, you're teaching lessons about genocide, you're trying to make sure that we as humanity never repeat some of those enormously difficult lessons. Tell us, how are you managing during Corona? Is the Holocaust and Genocide Center open at the moment?
First of all, thank you, Howard. Thank you to the South African Jewish Report for this partnership. It means a lot to us. And together with our sister centers in Cape Town and Durban, we are so thrilled to be part of tonight's event. It's really important. We are closed at the moment, and we are closed since March, since the lockdown. Our offices are open, so if you need us, please do phone, and our cafes open for deliveries, but we are not welcoming schools. It's just too dangerous. So we moved online immediately, and we are teaching schools, universities, bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah programs every day. We are online, we are holding webinars and podcasts and many interactive activities. And more importantly, we are looking to keep in touch with our survivors. So we are looking after remotely, because we cannot go and see them, but we are phoning and keeping in touch with our Holocaust survivors and with the survivors from Rwanda. And in fact, Howard, I hope you do not mind, but we lost this week 2 dear Holocaust survivors. Asya Lieberman, that passed away on Tuesday, was a survivor from Lithuania that was also rescued by a Righteous Amongst the Nation, Joseph Makevicius, that hid her family, her father, her brother, her sister, and herself for 3 years in a barn in a village in Lithuania. We sadly lost her. She passed away on Tuesday, and today we are absolutely devastated, but another Holocaust survivor passed away today, Henry Mintz, Yehi Zichro Baruch, may his memory be of blessing. We're really devastated. He died in hospital this morning. So I would like to dedicate actually tonight's webinar to the memory of Asya and Henry, and for all those that lost their lives in the pandemic in South Africa and around the world.
Tali, what a beautiful and fitting tribute. So we, in fact, dedicate tonight to their memories and to those people who, in fact, risked their own lives to make sure that they survived, only to be cut down at this terrible time of COVID.
Absolutely.
Before we go on and actually jump directly into the program, we do in fact have a related webinar on Tuesday, and we're joined by Danny Kedar and Dina Diamond. Danny, you've been working enormously hard on Tuesday's webinar. Tell us what we're looking at.
Great, thanks, Howard. So Tuesday night's webinar is going to be a hot topic. It certainly has been. We've had a fortune of articles written about it in the South African Jewish Report newspaper. We've had a lot of adverts and editorials in the past 2 years, and that is the subject of second passports. How can you claim your second passport within the following countries: Latvia, Lithuania, Portugal, and even Spain? We're going to be doing a deep dive on these following subjects, bringing a whole variety of experts that are going to be talking about these countries and how you go through the entire process of claiming your second passport as well as citizenship in these countries based on your ancestry. Sadly, it is relevant. It is related to the topic of tonight's discussion. So many Jewish families in the millions had experienced, obviously, exile or had to just leave these countries from the aftermath of World War II. However, it is something that we would like to revisit, our roots, as well as obtaining EU passports and access, quite easy access in the European Union. So it is a highly relevant topic, certainly going to be jam-packed evening with a variety of specialists chatting about these, about how you go through this process. So certainly not to be missed. But also one thing that Dina is also going to be touching on now is your golden visas. Golden visas are very popular in Portugal and Spain and even Cyprus. They, as well as the United States, obviously it comes in the form of EB5 investments. How you utilize these platforms But I've said my piece and over to Dina to talk about that.
So Dina, is it correct that some passports you can get from Heritage and some passports you can in fact get through investment? Is that the difference?
That is absolutely. So, yes, so as Danny mentioned, and as we spoke now, we can hear that a lot of our South African community does come from Lithuania and Latvia. And historically, over the years, there's been sort of a progressive uptick of South African Jews, especially wanting to get their Lithuanian passports and Latvian passports. So there are specialists who've been working on that, and the laws also have evolved continuously. So the ancestral ones, whether you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi, if you come from Eastern Europe or the North African countries, or if you come from Portugal or Spain, we have got the specialists, we've got the experts who understand those territories, who understand how you can get those heritage visas. And then also, again, with those investments, how you can actually get another passport for another country like the UK, like Cyprus, like the US, so that you can actually get that second passport. We also know that getting visas these days to go to any country is a time-consuming process, it's an expensive process, and a lot of people have seen the benefits in getting a second passport. So I think we're going to get all the tips, the tricks, the expert opinions, the challenges, the requirements, all of that rolled up into one on Tuesday evening. If this is something that is interesting you, or something that you've actually gone through, or something you would like to look into, then it's literally something you cannot miss.
Dina, thank you very much. We'll see you at 8 o'clock on Tuesday evening. You and I will be hosting that one. And for anyone who wants to register, we'll be sending out the advert tomorrow. But in the interim, Dan has in fact posted into the chat section, he's posted details of where you can go and register immediately. So Dina, we'll see you Tuesday night.
Absolutely. I know you're going to have such an unbelievable show tonight. The contents are incredible. I myself have been to Sugihara House in Kaunas, in Kovna, in Lithuania. So it's just something, it's such an amazing story. And Tali, to have you on the panel is fantastic, because you are just an absolute golden gem in terms of what you do. You're just amazing. So thank you for everything you do, and enjoy your panel, because it's going to be spectacular. I'm looking forward to it.
See you on Tuesday. Thank you, Dina.
Thank you.
So Tali, tonight, what should people expect? What are we going to be doing during the course of this evening?
So, you know, us at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, we teach about genocide, about the Holocaust, and we teach it through the lens of choices that people made during those difficult times, choices that communities made, governments made, and so on. Also, of course, our permanent exhibition features the story and the history of the Holocaust, but also of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda in 1994. So we wanted to bring both tonight, to bring storytelling from the Holocaust and from the genocide in Rwanda, but through choices, the choices that people made to be activists, to be rescuers. We call them righteous, the righteous amongst the nations, those that saved Jews in the Holocaust, but extended to look at upstanders. What is an upstander? An upstander is the opposite of a bystander. It's someone that stands up and does something. And we're going to see amazing stories. We will start with the story of Sugihara, a Japanese diplomat that saved the Jewish people in Kovno and in Lithuania. We'll move to Poland and look at Oskar Schindler, and there will be a bit of a personal story, my story. And then we will move to Rwanda in 1994 and the story of Carl Wilkins and Damaski Simba and the orphanage and the people that they saved. So we will look at survival, but we will also look at victims, of course, people that did not survive, but we will celebrate those that saved lives during those dark times.
Thanks, Tali, and we'll see you in a few minutes' time. And a big thank you to Dan Stillerman, who's controlling everything behind the scenes this evening. And just to remind you that you have two buttons at the bottom of your screen. The one button says chat. That will allow you to chat with everyone watching, and we're at our maximum capacity of 1,000 logins on Zoom. Everyone else has gone to YouTube. And we also have a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions for any of the panelists, please click on the Q&A button. Dan and I will be monitoring both the Q&A button there as well as the Q&A or the comment section on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. So please feel free to express yourself in the chat section. But if you have any specific questions for any of the panelists tonight, please just use the Q&A section. That having been said, we want to start off with the story, a story that's maybe not as well known as some of the others, but we want to start off by telling the story of a Japanese diplomat, someone called Sugihara, who was the vice consul in Kaunas, in Lithuania. So for a background, we just have a very short video and an interview that Talia and I did on Friday with Sugihara's granddaughter.
After the German conquest of Poland in September 1939, several thousand Polish Jews managed to flee into the still independent state of Lithuania to the city of Kaunas, and they feared that the next phase of Germany's advance would be into Lithuania. But they had no means of getting out, they had no documentation. Two diplomats in Kaunas came to their rescue. One was actually a businessman, Jan Zwardendyk, and the other was a very remarkable Japanese diplomat, Kune Sugihara. And these two men cooked up a scheme which had no legality, no validity. Sugihara issued transit visas based on this Curaçao document, saying that Japan had no objection whatsoever to people who had transit visas going through Japan. And so these Jews made this incredibly long journey right across European Russia, right across Siberia to Japan.
In 1940, my parents were able to get a visa from Mr. Sugihara. Mr. Sugihara wrote these visas by hand. He was able to write a little over 2,000 visas. He really didn't know what would happen to him as a result of the things that he did. He saw people who were really desperate to leave Lithuania.
The whole area around the house was full of people. In front of the house, and there was a gate, there were thousands of people all trying to get in.
And that's when he cabled to Japan that he wanted to do this, and they said no.
Apparently he wasn't allowed to issue any visas other than specific visas on specific instructions from his government.
459. Well, that's certainly my lucky number.
Thanks to Zwardendyk and Sugihara, as many as 3,000 Jews were saved, including all the Jewish students of the Mir Yeshiva, the Orthodox Religious Academy.
He was, of course, thrown out of the Foreign Office. His pension was cancelled. He worked for a living, if you can call that a living, by being a porter in one of the harbors of Japan, carrying heavy loads from ship to shore, backwards and forwards. He really paid for it. He paid with his health. What makes a man do such a thing? Well, good men do good things.
Madoka Sugihara, you are the granddaughter of the very famed Sugihara, who was consul general in Kovna in Lithuania and saved the lives of many thousands of Jews. Tell us about your grandfather.
I am June Sugihara's granddaughter, and my father is his first son. So my grandfather, June Sugihara, Japanese consul in Kaunas, Lithuania at the outbreak of World War II, acted in defiance of his own government to issue life-saving Japanese transit visas for Jewish refugees moved by their plight. Sugihara sought permission from his superiors for mass insurance of visas, but was firmly rebuffed. The diplomat, struggling with his own conscience, ultimately reached the conclusion that humanity and compassion come first. He resolved to save the refugees and, at risk to his own career and future, issued thousands of visas that gave these people new lives.
So your grandfather issued many thousands of visas, even from the train as the train was pulling out of Kovna, to save the lives of so many Jews. And it's estimated today that tens of thousands of lives or people are alive because of your grandfather. What do you think motivated him and made him so brave to defy the orders of his government and make sure that he understood that he had the power to save so many lives?
She believes that her grandfather made that difficult decision to save Jewish people. For one thing, Sugihara grew up. The first reason is that the environment that he grew up at home, he had this loving mother, and he grew up in this kind of environment which nurtured his empathy and kind spirit and wisdom. And the other thing is that when Sugihara was studying Russian as a candidate for diplomat in Manchuria, the school that he went had these three important teaching lessons, which is saying that you look after others, but don't cause trouble to others, and ask no favor in return. So those are the things that Madoka believes that helped her grandfather make that decision.
Once again, so in 1968, Mr. Nishiri, he was working in Japanese, in the Japan-Israel embassy, who was saved by my grandfather in 1940. So he got visas. So he was looking for my grandfather. And it's first time he found out to my grandfather. So, and he was recognized to Jewish people. The information was spread to Jewish people in the world. And in 1969, my grandfather invited to Israel government to meet Mr. Balfaktik. He was he was a
Minister of Religion?
Yes. And my grandfather's name was spread in the Jewish people.
Sometime in the 70s, he was interviewed by someone. He had an opportunity to speak about his experience in Lithuania. And what he said at that time was that he might have made a wrong decision as a diplomat, but I just couldn't abandon those people who were in need of help. And I never regret it for once. That's what Madoka remembers.
Yes, he was recognized by Yad Vashem as the righteous amongst the nations.
In today's world, we still witness discrimination all over, but my grandfather never discriminated against anybody, and so he showed us such important courage for all of us. So my mission is to pass it down to next generation. ちょっとまどかさん付け加えちゃったかな。
So thank you so much to both of you, Fumiko and to Madoko. We hope to come visit you in Tokyo and to see the work that both of you are doing in perpetuating the memory of such a great hero and such a man who has given life to many tens of thousands of people who are alive today. It is a great honor to meet you both. Tali, thank you so much for setting up this interview, and we look forward to seeing you all in real life. So Tali, tell us, who were those people we saw on the screen there?
So we had the honor of talking, first of all, to the granddaughter of Sugihara, Madoka Sugihara. She lives in Tokyo, Japan, and she runs a museum, a small museum in Tokyo in honor of her grandfather. And also she runs the Chinook Sugihara Visas for Life Institute in Tokyo. And helping, because her English was, she wasn't so sure about her English, she invited her colleague, a friend, and a very good friend of us in South Africa, of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, Fumiko Ishioka, who is the director of the Holocaust Education Resource Center in Japan. And I'm sure many of you know Fumiko. She came to South Africa twice, but she is the author of Hannah's Suitcase, the story of Hannah Brady, that is connected actually to Hannah, who was murdered in Auschwitz, and her brother, George Brady, that survived and lived in Toronto.
So we're joined now by Rabbi Yossi Goldman. Rabbi Goldman, you have an amazing story to tell about your father. Tell us about your dad.
You hear me?
Yes, sure.
Yes.
So my dad was born in Poland in 1925. When the Germans invaded Poland in 1939, he's a 14-year-old boy. He had a number of bad experiences. Firstly, he was walking in town of Schedlitz, where he was born with his father, when suddenly out of the sky came German Stuka dive bombers strafing the city. He said they were so low they could hear the Nazi pilots laughing as they machine gunned people all over the city. His father threw him into a cabbage patch, and they said Shema Yisrael, the last words before they're going to die. My father told this story at the Sidnon Shul at the bar mitzvah of my eldest son in 1987. He was remembering that story, and here he is now celebrating his eldest grandson's bar mitzvah in Johannesburg. Anyway, he decided after that and another experience that he's leaving. His parents thought it'll blow over, as many people did, but many people were leaving town, leaving Poland, and so he attached himself to a family who were leaving, and they said he could join them. And he basically ran away from home, which was quite providential, because he wasn't such an adventurer. He wasn't the rebel, my father, by nature. So that he ran away from home is somewhat unbelievable. He ran away. Age 14, they took him to Vilna in Lithuania. And there he joined up with the Lubavitch Yeshiva in Vilna. And to make a very long story short, my father told his story into a tape recorder, and we subsequently made a book, From Schedlitz to Safety, about his life story. And they got visas. The Miri Yeshiva was the biggest yeshiva, but there were a couple of other yeshivas as well. And they got visas, the whole yeshiva, transit visas from Sugihara. My father didn't even know the name. He just heard that there was a diplomat in the Japanese consulate in Kovne. He never heard the name Sugihara till many years later. We heard now from the granddaughter that it was only an Israeli diplomat in the 60s who discovered Sugihara. So he just said help came from an unexpected source. And listen to their travel. So Poland, Vilna, then to Moscow, then Moscow across the whole of Russia, from Europe through Asia to Vladivostok on the Asian port of Russia, and there by ship to Kobe, Japan. They spent a year in Kobe, Japan. And in 1941, when Japan entered the war on the side of Germany, it seems that the Jews had to get out of Japan. And they went to Shanghai. And Shanghai was an open port where you didn't need visas. And there were about 5 yeshivas in Shanghai, many Jewish refugees, not only yeshivas, many Jewish refugees found safe haven in Shanghai. And there they realized, most of these boys, that they were left alone in the world. Can you imagine teenagers discovering that there's no one left? Father, mother, brothers, sisters, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, nobody. Most of them were the sole survivors of their families. Eventually, after the war, the Lubavitch Central Headquarters in New York sent visas for them to America. They went by boat from Shanghai to San Francisco, by train to Chicago, Chicago to New York. And he settled in New York, and in 1949 married my mother, and the rest is history. So that's, in a very, very brief summary, my father's story. So I can say a lot more, but I don't know.
So, Rov, did he discover the name? Did he know the name ultimately at some point in time? Did he know the name Sugihara?
Yes. In his later years, he did find out the name Sugihara. And I think he even went to a meeting once where they honored Sugihara back in New York, but he didn't meet him personally.
Now, there was a moment where you got the opportunity to, in fact, meet Sugihara's son. Is that correct?
100%. It's just over a year ago, May last year.
We're going to ask you about that in a second, but what we have done is we've actually got a little movie that we've put together of that gathering. So, Rov, tell us about what was it like to, as a descendant of a survivor, to meet the descendant of a savior?
So my son, whose bar mitzvah it was when my father told that story, is now rabbi in Philadelphia. I think the oldest ongoing Orthodox shul in Philadelphia, congregation B'nai Abraham in Center City, Philadelphia. And they have an event every year. And they do something different every year. And last year they called me that he and his chairman had this idea. His shul chairman is a bit of an amateur historian. And they thought, wouldn't it be a great idea to have the son of the rescuer meet the son of the rescued? And they called it from Kovnit to Kobe. And there I met Nabuki Sugihara, the sole surviving child of Chuni Sugihara, who is today a diamond merchant in Antwerp, Belgium. And he flew over to America for this occasion, and I flew over, Rachel and I. And the function was on a Sunday evening, but on the Friday morning, they went to a Japanese house, very fitting place. There's a Japanese house in Philadelphia, koi fish and everything is there. And And there we met for the first time. You saw pictures there of the two of us embracing. I can say it was one of the most emotional moments of my whole life. I'm even getting emotional now speaking about it and remembering. When we saw each other and then we came and embraced each other. And it was a long embrace. It was a long embrace because there was so much history and so much emotion in that embrace. And then we spoke a little bit in Hebrew because Nabuki studied at the Hebrew University. When Israel found out what Shuni Sugihara had done for Jewish people, they contacted Shuni Sugihara and said, "What can we do for you in return?" He said, "I'm an old man, I'm fine. If you can give my son an education, that would be nice." Nabuki was his youngest son, and he was still university age, and he was given a scholarship to Hebrew University. And he went there, and then he got an interest in the diamond industry, and he went to Ramat Gan and learned the diamond trade. And today he's in that business in Antwerp, which is a center for diamonds. But he speaks a fluent Hebrew. At the function in Philadelphia, one woman asked a question. I said to Nabuki, "Answer her in Hebrew." And he did, and the whole crowd applauded when they heard him speaking Hebrew. And he and I were speaking Hebrew, and one of the, it was a whole press conference, a media conference, and one of the journalists said, "Well, what was he saying?" And Nabuki says to the journalist, he says, "This is our secret language." So it was a very, very, very powerful emotional experience. And the event itself, the two of us were interviewed by a prominent lawyer together on the stage. So there were three of us on the stage. You did show a picture of that earlier. And, people asked him, what made his father do this? And he said, basically, he just wrestled with his conscience, and he felt he has to do the right thing. He has to save lives. In the end, he lost his career. He lost his income. He struggled for many years. I know we're going to talk about Schindler's List. Tali's going to share with us her story. But there is a Sugihara list as well, which I've seen. And he issued 2,139 visas against the wishes of his government. Many of them were family visas. So it was about 6,000 souls, apparently. Of the 2,139, my father was number 2,029. So he pretty much just got in there. And interestingly enough, a few names down from my father, Yecheskel Darren, Rabbi Darren in Bloberg in Cape Town, my son-in-law, his Zayda, his grandfather, was on the same list and studied with my father in yeshiva. And today their grandchildren are married to each other and doing good work in Cape Town.
Rabbi Goldman, let us just, for example, take an example. He saved your father. And by saving that one life, how many descendants of your father are there that owe their life to Sugihara?
So I remember saying at the media conference in Philadelphia, holding him and saying, without his father, I would not be here. How often does one have a chance to say thank you to someone who saved your life and your whole family? So my father was the sole survivor of his whole family. When he died in 91, he left over 100 blood descendants. Now, of the 6,000 people say that Sugihara saved 30,000, 40,000 people are alive today thanks to Sugihara. I dispute that number. I say it's much higher. Of course, we don't have, it would take years and years of research to get an accurate figure. But if you just look at my father, over 100, I know one of his friends who are older and live longer has over 500 descendants. So if 6,000 people were saved, if everyone was 100, that's 600,000, okay? I don't think it's, not everybody was religious, not everybody had big families, But the fact is that I'm convinced it must be over 100,000 or maybe 200,000. I think 30, 40,000 that people are saying is a very, very underestimated figure.
Well, Rabbi, when we sent out this evening, or when we sent out an advert for that for tonight, we got, in fact, a message from the United States from someone we hadn't met before. Doron Gopstein is joining us from the United States, and he too is a descendant of one of those saved by Sugihara. Doron, welcome. Lovely to have you on tonight.
Good to be here.
Tell us where in the world you're joining us from.
I'm in New York, in Manhattan, and my brother Israel is watching from Florida, and my cousins Ari and Shira are watching about an hour away further in New York.
So tell us your story. Tell us your Sugihara story.
Our family came from Lithuania and Belarus, from Vilna. My parents and my cousin's parents were all educators. They were raised and ultimately taught in the Tarbut school system, which was a prominent school system in Eastern Europe, then a Zionist, modern Hebrew school system. Our parents made Aliyah to Israel in 1935 and 36. Our cousin, and our cousins' parents or mother at that time, grandparents at that time, stayed behind as other people did. They had, by the time 1940 came around and the story that we've now heard, they were in the same desperate situation. This is, I'm talking now about the couple that was, for my brother Israel and myself, this was not only our closest uncle and aunt, but for a long time, our only uncle and aunt. Because like a lot of people, and I'm sure people watching on this show, perhaps in our generation, we grew up without aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents. So if you had, as we did, an uncle and aunt that we ultimately met, this was something rare. And for our cousins, Ari and Shira, this is their grandparents. And they were there, they were in the same desperate situation. What we ultimately found out, and only with certainty 2 years ago, because this is part of an extraordinary trip that my brother Israel and Ari and I made to Lithuania and Belarus 2 years ago. We had suspected, based on bits of information here and there, that they had had an unusual journey. And when I was growing up, and certainly in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Sugihara certainly was not known. And people who survived the Holocaust did not talk about it. All we knew is that somewhere along the line, our aunt and uncle had somehow wound up in India, in Calcutta. And somewhere in my old letters, I have letters from Calcutta in World War II to my parents in Palestine. So this was part of what became for them a 9-year journey to ultimately get, they got the visa, as we found out in that short period of time that Sugihara was issuing it in 1940s. And when we, the three of us, made the trip to Lithuania, we visited the hometowns of our parents, Michalishek and Oshmina, these are the Yiddish names, and Vilna, of course. But we went to Kovno, to Knaus, to see the museum. And there we went to the register and we looked down from number 1. And as the gentleman who just spoke said, his grandfather or his father was near the end of the list, 2,100 names or so. And the same thing happened to us. I remember we were looking down the list, 400, 600, 1,200, and I said, well, maybe it wasn't meant to be. And when we got to 1,956, there was the name Ephraim Guberman, which is my uncle's name, the mother. And I remember turning to the cousin, and we said, Ari, you are a Sugihara survivor for sure. It was a moment you cannot describe. Since that time, we've done a lot of research, and Ari especially. It's extraordinary what you can do online. And Ari, for example, found the ship manifesto that his grandparents were on when they traveled across Russia and Siberia. And when you get to Vladivostok, you had to take a ship to get to Japan, the same trip you just heard about. And he was able to find the ship that they were on, and they found their names on it, and find out further that at that point they were turned back. And they were actually told they would have to go back to Vilna, which would have meant certain death. And because of an exchange of words and such, they were able to move on to go to Japan. From Japan, they wound up going to Shanghai, as many Jews did. And that was for a period of time. And somehow my uncle had thought this, I remember, that somehow he wanted to get to Palestine. And he thought that if he got to a British colony, that might help him. So somehow they managed to get to India from Shanghai, and they lived in Calcutta for 3 years. And in Calcutta, my aunt, Sarah, became the principal of the Jewish school in Calcutta. And the uncle wound up working, he was a lawyer, was trained as a lawyer in Vilna. He wound up working for the British civil servant. And ultimately they got permission from the British to come from India to Palestine. And when they came to Palestine, just before Israel was born, is when my brother Israel and I first met them. And first, at that time, met their only child. And that was our first relatives that we had ever met. And ultimately, they and we wound up in the United States here in New York. And during all those years that we were growing up, we knew bits and pieces of this. And as the name Sugihara became more prominent, we began to think that this might relate to him. And when we went to Lithuania 2 years ago and went to the museum, there was that magic moment. About a year later, and I think also the gentleman who just spoke referred to Sugihara's son who came to the United States last year. Well, I met him also, but at a different function. In May of last year, the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, which is the main Holocaust museum in New York, invited him to speak to a very large group. But they also had a reception beforehand for people who came from Sugihara survivor families. So there were about 150 of us who came to a reception area with Sugihara's son, Nobuki Sugihara is his name. And it was one of the most extraordinary experiences I've ever had. I was actually standing right next to him during most of the time because I was so fascinated by this. And people were coming up to him as if they were coming up to the Mashiach. They knew that this was not the senior Sugihara, it was the son. And every so often he had to say to someone, this was my father, not me, because people were looking at someone who had saved their lives. And people came with albums of photos that they wanted him to see. You know, you asked before how many people survived. Somebody, and maybe more from the Orthodox families especially, would show a picture of 4 generations with 100 people. And at least 20 people that I saw came with the original visa that Sugihara had signed, which is the most treasured heirloom that they possess 70, 80 years later. And he was looking at them and saying, yes, that's my father's signature. It was an extraordinary moment. As we were finishing it, the organizer said, could you all get together around Mr. Sugihara? And they took the photo that I sent you earlier and that you now see on the screen of over 150 people, all survivors or family of survivors of Sugihara surrounding his son. And you look at that, and I also spoke to him a few minutes later towards the end of the evening. And also, as you had heard, he spoke Hebrew because of the scholarship that he received to Hebrew University. And it was really amazing to be standing there and speaking fluent Hebrew to a Japanese, well, he wasn't the diplomat, of course, he was the son of the diplomat. So that is, you know, what has happened. And as far as getting more information, let me just add one little point, that at that meeting, there were many survivors and people connected. And one of the people that came up to my cousin Ari was the son of another survivor, and their children, I think, went to the same school. And there is a Facebook page which connected a lot of Sugihara survivors. Right. So there's more information that way. I don't have it with me, but I could certainly give it to you if other people are interested. So that is the story. And in those last 2 years, we have discovered a lot. And these are all moments that you could not believe, you know, if you did not experience them.
Well, Doron, thank you for sharing your story. It's the most remarkable story. And it's amazing to see how many people around the world acknowledge their lives to really an act of humanity by one individual. I know while you were talking, in fact, Rabbi Goldman's son, Choni, sent us a actual extract of the list from Sugihara. Dan, I don't know if you have that that we can line up, but we'll.
Yeah, that is exactly the list that we were looking at in the museum last year or 2 years ago. I mean, there are of course many photos of this now, but I remember viscerally the experience of literally looking from number one and just going down, because next to each name is the city of the person, male or female, maybe the age or something like that. And it's numbered consecutively. And you can imagine the feeling when you're looking down a long list. And as you're getting close to 2000 and you haven't come across the name and suddenly there is the name. So it was like a little miracle again. I mean, obviously we were not there seeking survival at that point, but we can imagine the feeling that they had once they got this visa, because they didn't have that much time to leave. I mean, the German and the Russians fell apart not too long after that. And that's why Sugihara had to close the council. So there was a desperation. We later found out, we went to the small town in Belarus where my father and the sister had lived. And in a small museum there, a one-room museum that we had found out online, that there were certain documents that they have. And when my cousin looked at those documents, remarkably, those documents were identification documents of my aunt and of his grandmother. And the question was, what in the world were they doing in a small museum in Belarus? And we went to that town and we connected with the fellow who ran the museum, and he opened it for us on a Sunday. And he went to a shoebox and he said, yeah, oh, here's the stuff. And he put it on a desk. And from that shoebox was not just one or two, but 6 or 7 documents. The teacher document, the identification of our grandmother, which sort of suggested to us that maybe they left in a great hurry and they could not take these things with us. And so that's what the whole visa story is about, is literally escape. And those documents we left in Belarus.
Amazing. Rabbi Goldman, looking at that list, halfway through is a Simon Goldman. Is that your father?
Simon Goldman that's my father, yes. And Hebrew was Shimon, but his legal name was Simon Goldman. And 2 down, you'll see Darren, Haskell Darren.
Okay, so let's just look at this. Number 2029 is Simon Goldman, your father, and 2 down.
2031.
2031 is Darren,
Haskell Darren,
who is the grandfather of Rabbi Darren from Cape Town.
Darren.
The grandfather, the grandfather Rabbi Darren, who's also your son-in-law.
So there's 2 grandchildren out today married and raising a family and leading community in Cape Town.
That is absolutely amazing. I see as well we've received a message from the Japanese ambassador to South Africa, who's in fact watching. In fact, Mr. Ambassador, your predecessor, Ambassador Hiroki, was a very good friend of mine. And I see, Ambassador, you've written to us and you say, the strong belief and will of this one man saved thousands of precious lives. As a Japanese, I'm so proud of him and his courageous actions. My sincere thanks for this webinar, for giving a great homage to Sugihara. And that is from Nono Maruya, sorry, I mispronounced it, Maruyama, and he is ambassador to South Africa for Japan. So Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for posting us. Really appreciate that. To all of you, to Doron, to Rabbi Goldman, thank you for telling us this remarkable story and allowing us to pay homage to such an amazing human being. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doron. Nice to meet you, Doron. Howie, can I just give one closing remark, please?
Of course.
Okay, so the function that Doron spoke about with the 170 survivors there, that was arranged by my son, offered it to the museum in New York, so they partnered in this project. So I met him in Philadelphia and he met him in New York. And the funny thing was, at the end of the evening in Philadelphia, a little old lady stands up and starts walking up to the stage, and nobody knows who she is or what, and she's brandishing a piece of paper in her hand. And she comes up to the stage and she's holding an original Sugihara visa. She and her mother and her sister picture were on that visa. And Sugihara couldn't stop looking at this, and his wife was taking pictures of this, and it was an unplanned and unorchestrated, spontaneous moment. My son didn't even know this woman was in Philadelphia, and it was a most remarkable finale to that evening. And of course, I also said there that from a from a general point of view, we see what one human being can do and save so many lives, and that I think tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people are alive today thanks to Chuni Sugihara of blessed memory. But also from a Jewish point of view, it shows our responsibility to rebuild our people. And thank God those survivors, even if they were sole survivors, managed to rebuild families and communities. And please God, we still have catching up to do, I'm afraid.
Thank you both for joining us. Tali, that's a remarkable story, is it not? Are there many stories like this?
It's really unbelievable. And Doron and Rabbi, really, thank you so much. To think that if your family stayed in Belarus or in Poland, surely they would not have survived. So that one person that made that choice made such a huge difference. And there are about 27,000 individuals and communities that were recognized by Yad Vashem in Jerusalem as righteous amongst the nations. And to be recognized as a righteous amongst the nation, you had to do it not for monetary reasons or for any other gains, even marriage or so on. You had to do it because that was the right value to save a life. And as I said, about just over 27,000. The largest number is in Poland. Of course, Poland was the largest community of Europe with 3.3 million Jews living in Poland. But they are from everywhere, including from Japan, from China, from the United States, and from many, many countries around the world, including Christians, Muslims, and many, many others.
So Tali, probably the most famous of all of this is the story of Oskar Schindler. Probably made most famous because Steven Spielberg made Schindler's List, the movie about it. We're going to discuss Schindler in a moment, but just for those people who maybe don't know the story, here is something just to give you a little bit of a background.
I'd make sure it's known the company's in business. I'd see that it had a certain panache. That's what I'm good at. Not the work, not the work. The presentation. Kielbasa sausage, cheeses, beluga caviar. And of course, who could live without German cigarettes? Get me as many as you can find. Some more fresh fruit. The real rarities, oranges, lemons, pineapples. I need several boxes of Cuban cigars, the best. And dark unsweetened chocolate, not in the shape of ladyfingers. A chunk of chocolate, big as my hand. You sample at wine tastings. 900, no, make it 10 for Wednesday. And all this stuff here goes to Madras's factory. I lost a worker. I expect to be compensated.
He's on the list?
Yes. Well, let's find him.
Stern! 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 Itzhak, Stern!
Stop the train! He's here! Stop the train!
Stop the train!
I woke up from a dream this morning. I was broke and sharing a room with 12 people I didn't know.
Who will want to start, huh? Do you have any questions, sir? Yeah, well, it's top down. I'm fucking freezing. What's your name?
Helen Hirsch.
You're tied to! Deine Papiere, Jude! Deine Papiere, Jude!
find every rag buried up here and burn it.
The list is life. All around its margins lies the cup.
So Tully, those are very emotional moments, and we are in fact joined from Prague in the Czech Republic by Dr. Edyta Gavron. Edyta, welcome. Great to have you with us this evening. You are in fact a Schindler expert, is that correct?
I wouldn't call myself Schindler's expert, but I've learned a lot about Oskar Schindler while preparing the museum in Oskar Schindler's history. So certainly I know more than average person does about Oskar Schindler.
He was a very complex individual. Tell us about him.
Absolutely. He was a man of many stories. From his early age, he was a troublemaker, he was an adventurer, and he was trying various things to make his life enjoyable and successful in some way. And when he was in pre-war Czechoslovakia, because he was born in Austro-Hungary in the town that became later on the part of Czechoslovakia, he was born to a German family, which was important. He early on started some cooperation with German colleagues, and then he was involved in espionage for Germany. So that was part of the reasons why he was also involved and connected, and he was familiar with Poland, because one of his missions was to recognize or to find out information in pre-war Poland. So we can see that he was not interested in hard working, running business. He was unsuccessful in that before the war, but he wanted to do something exciting. And for this excitement, he also paid the price. He was arrested several times, but later on, he managed to use his adventurous nature to also do something very positive.
So many people have in fact accused him of being a war profiteer. He sets up a factory. His objective there is not to save people. His objective is to make money. Is that correct?
Definitely. This was the beginning of his stay in Krakow. He arrived to Krakow early into the war. He arrived after Krakow was occupied by Nazi Germany, and he had one goal to make money. That's what it seems from his testimonies, from the testimonies of the others. He was interested in making money, and he was looking for some business to take over and continue its success. But while he was doing that, he certainly also showed some empathy to the people he was working with. So being a Nazi Party member, because he was the member of Nazi Party, profiting from the fact that he was a German in occupied Poland, he also made some friends in Krakow who were Jewish, and he in a sense became more sensitive to the Jewish fate under the Nazi German occupation. So he didn't separate his Jewish friends and colleagues from like the rest of the society. He had some sympathy for them. Of course, he also paid the price for that, because as a German, as a member of the Nazi Party member, he was not expected, or he was forbidden to be familiar with the Jews. So even if he was seen publicly, shaking hands or kissing a Jewish girl who was wishing him happy birthday, he went into troubles, legal troubles.
So he sets up this factory in Poland. What does the factory do? And he needs laborers for the factory. So he has a choice. He can either go for expensive Polish laborers, or he can go for Jewish laborers at a cheaper price, but he still has to pay their wages, not to the laborers, but he has to pay that over to the Nazi Party.
Yeah, so in fact, he didn't set up the factory from the scratch. I have to tell that this was taking over the factory that was run before the Second World War by a group of Jewish businessmen who underinvested in this business and got bankrupt before the Second World War. He took it over. He found some good Jewish advisors who helped him through the following years to run this factory. He didn't know exactly how to run this business. So he relied on the expertise of some Jews who used to work for Jewish businesses in Krakow before the Second World War. So certainly this dependence on a Jewish know-how also made him more closer to the Jews of Krakow. That was one thing. And based on this cooperation, at the beginning, he was hiring mainly Polish non-Jewish workers. But then his advisor told him, you know, if you hire Jews, it will be cheaper for you, but also you will do something probably good for these people. You will give them work and you might save them. So that's what happened later on. It was not from the very beginning that he was hiring Jews to make a bigger profit, but he learned how to do it later on. The numbers, the proportions between Polish non-Jewish and Jewish workers changed over the year 1940 and 1941. When the ghetto was established in Krakow in 1941, certainly it was much more crucial to hire Jews who were in the ghetto, which was not far from the factory. And the number of Jewish workers for Schindler's factory increased dramatically to almost up to 1,000 people.
So he has all these people working in the factory, and I saw one of the interviews with one of the people from Schindler's List, and it's a little kid, he's working in the factory, but Schindler actually comes to talk to him. He treats his workers as if they're human. And the guy then goes to get rations, and he discovers that Schindler's in fact doubled his rations. So he seemed to see the humanity in the workers that were working for him. They weren't slave laborers to him.
Yes, definitely. He saw human beings, and he was very very sensitive to some personal tragedies of his workers. He was hiring the members of their families. He was also aware that he couldn't go public with his support to the Jews he hired. So I love the story about the cigarettes, which I repeat on any occasion just to show you how he helped his workers. If he helped openly, he could have problems with the legal supervision of his work. But he wanted to help his workers. So every time he entered the production hall of his factory, he had a package full of cigarettes, and he would start one cigarette, throw it down on the floor, and then again and again. So after passing the whole production hall, he would end the whole package of cigarettes. Why he did that? Why didn't he give the whole package to the workers? He knew that this would be too obvious, but he wanted to leave the cigarettes on the floor for them so they can finish them, they can trade them. So this was like an example of how he helped people. And he was instructed by Itzhak Stern, who was one of his advisors, to do little things to improve the conditions of his workers.
So some of the
just come in and say to you that the cigarette story was told to me as a little girl, and not only Oscar gave the cigarettes, but then when Emily, his wife, joined specifically in Brunlitz, she did exactly the same trick. So that is amazing when you're telling that story, and I can, as a little girl, remember that story so vividly.
Mm-hmm.
So Edith, tell us what exactly, in watching some of the testimonies, people would also tell the stories of how Schindler would come to them and say, be careful, over the next few days, the SS are going to be like taking revenge on people, doing things outside, be careful, stay away. So he was an early warning system for many of the people that he was with. But what actually is the list? What is the list that is Schindler's List?
So in fact, when studying his history, I realized that there is nothing that we call Schindler's List as known from the movie. There are several lists of his workers on different stages of the functioning of his factory. And there is a list of his workers that was sent from the factory in Krakow to Brunlitz, which was the subcamp of Gross-Rosen concentration camp. So we have several lists that are known as Schindler's List, but in fact, the most complete ones, because this was the last one, is the one of the prisoners who were sent to Brunlitz, registered by Gross-Rosen. And there are copies that circulate around. There are various interpretations of this list, but we have to know that it's not the list that was written by Oskar Schindler. It's not as romantic and nostalgic as it was portrayed in the movie, but in fact, these were the lists put together by his clerks, his officers in the factory, or people in the camp.
So how many people are on that list?
Yeah, so it's believed, because as we are talking about the list, that it's not one list, it's believed that about 1,200 people were saved as workers in his factory on both stages, in Krakow, in Brunlitz. And I have to explain to people who do not know the story that the factory functioned for several years in Krakow. But in 1944, when Oskar Schindler realized that Germany is being defeated, he wanted to protect his factory and his workers. He made sure that his factory could be moved to the area of occupied Czechoslovakia, to the area that he originally came from. And that's how he managed also, which is kind of unusual and unheard of, to move around 1,000 of his workers from Krakow to Brunlitz successfully, with a very dramatic story of women who were sent from Krakow through Auschwitz-Birkenau to Brunlitz.
So we have a copy of one of the pages from one of these lists that we'd like to put on the screen now. So Dan's going to do that for us. Tali, tell us, this page has some significance for you.
Absolutely. So this is the list that Edita was explaining to us, the Gross-Rosen list, sending the workers from Krakow to the subcamp of Gross-Rosen in Brunlitz. This is page 10 of the men's list. And maybe Dan, if you can help with the mouse to show the names of Turner Moses. He is 8. You see the number 8 on top. Just about 10, yeah, Turner Moses. This is my father. And just go down few names to Turner Henrik. And 5, you will see the number 5, Turner Henrik. And this is my uncle. So both my father and my uncle were saved through being on the list, as you can see here.
So Tali, in fact, tell us the story of your father and your uncle.
So remember that list, and I'll speak a little bit about it later. Maybe we will look at it again. But maybe I'll start by telling you a story of a family of my father, the Turner family, 4 children. Henrik is the oldest. Helen or Hela is the second oldest. Moses, my father, is the 3rd, and Sila is the little one. Their mother is Leah Turner, but tragically their father, Tzvi, passed away when my father was 2 years old from cancer. They tried to save his life, could not, and the widow had the 4 kids, and with the help of the extended family, they lived in a small town in the southwest of Poland called Nowy Targ. Now, why I'm saying let's look at a family, because I said in the beginning of today that this is a story about choices, but it's also a story about what happened to those that are saved, but also to those that are not. So what happens to that family when the Nazis come into Nowy Targ, that is in the Tatra Mountains, very close to Zakopane, the ski resort? When separation happened, it happens very quickly. My father is sent to his first concentration camp, my uncle to another, but my grandmother, Leah, and the 2 girls, Helen and Sila, and I'm named after Helen. My second name is Helen. They were 16 and 12 years old at the time. In August of 1942, they are selected amongst the selection in the town, sent to the Belzec killing center and murdered in probably around the 30th of August 1942. And in Belzec, that existed for 10 months, almost 500,000 Jews were murdered in 10 months. Only 5 escaped. Of them, only 1 survived the war to give testimony. So that is the one part of my family that is murdered, and all the rest of the family is murdered. And then the 2 brothers, Henrik and Moses, Moshe, my father, going between different camps and then meeting again in Plaszów, in Krakow, in the concentration camp that was seen in this film of Schindler's List. And they meet there after not seeing each other for more than 2 years, and reuniting, not knowing that the rest of the family was murdered, swearing never to part, saying that whatever happens to them, they must be together, and going through horrific stuff in Plaszów. Plaszów was a slave labor camp that became a concentration camp with 30,000 prisoners all together in the camp, difficult conditions. Just to give you 2 examples, my father my father and my uncle were part of those prisoners chosen to uncover the mass graves and destroy the evidence for the Nazis. They were those Sonderkommando that had to do that terrible task. My father also was beaten up by the Nazis as a punishment, and many, many other stories. And then, of course, the deportations are happening to Auschwitz, and there is a talk about the liquidation of the camp. And at that stage, Oskar Schindler decides to tried to do something extremely daring and create another camp next to his hometown in the Sudetenland, in Brunlitz. His hometown was Zwickau. And he's actually even trying to convince other industrialists and other factory owners, that worked through Krakow and Plaszow to do the same. No one is as crazy as him. As Edita said, part of what is amazing is that he was adventurous, he was courageous, and he decides to do that. And he saves, and by doing that, he saves 1,200 men, women, and children. Now, going back to this list, page 10 of the list, you will see that in the list, there is a description of what the people are doing. So in a way, Oskar Schindler can say, well, I need this person because he is an expert worker. And Turner Moses, that is my father, born in 1924, as you can see here, is described together with his brother, Henrik, as builders, barrack builders or carpentry. And one is a barrack builder, the other one is assistant barrack builder. And in that way, thank you, Dan, for showing where they are. In that way, they are put on the list to as if create the new camp. And they are sent to Gross Rosen first. They were there for some weeks, and Gross Rosen, of course, a terrible, terrible concentration camp next to Wroclaw, and then sent to Brunlitz. And they are in Brunlitz for until the end of the war, for just about 10 months, until May of 1945, and then liberated by the Soviets, by the Russians, then to discover that no one else survived. So starting with the family and then ending all alone, thanks to Oskar Schindler.
So Tali, what did they tell you about Schindler growing up? What did you know? Did you know the name? Did they speak about it? Did they tell you stories?
So my father was 14 years old when the war started. And he was a teenager throughout the war until liberation when he was 19. Was very traumatized by what he went through. So he was the quiet one that didn't speak. My uncle was older, he was 4 years older, and he spoke. And many of the stories I knew from my uncle. They both lived in Israel. I was born in Israel. I have an older brother, Amir. My mother is also from Poland, from Warsaw. And growing up, my father did not speak, but had nightmares and spoke very little. My uncle spoke a lot, wrote his memories, wrote poetry about his experiences, but I heard a lot from him. The other thing that perhaps I'll share that is interesting, Oskar Schindler used to come to Israel to visit his people. And my father, that was not a wealthy man, he was a motor mechanic. He worked in a Volkswagen garage, actually, as a mechanic. He used to save his little money to give to the fund to bring Schindler to Israel. And Schindler used to come to Israel for a few months, and my father and my mother used to go and see him and party with him, basically, drink with him and laugh with him. And my mother, that is still alive, she's 94 years old, living in Tel Aviv, always says to me that he was a very good-looking man and very charming. So these are kind of the stories that I grew up with. Of course, Oskar Schindler died in 1974, October 1974, and asked to be buried in Jerusalem. And as you saw in the film that you shared with us, he's buried on Mount Zion, Catholic cemetery. And I went many times to visit his grave.
So you have a deeply flawed character. Schindler's wife at some point in time says, how can I be jealous of his affairs? If he was having an affair with one woman, I'd be jealous, but he's having an affair with hundreds of women. So you have a womanizer, someone who parties, someone who drinks excessively, who loves the good life. Every time he gets his hand on any money, he spends it wildly on partying and alcohol. Deeply flawed, but yet at his very core is a sense of humanity that is almost unique. So maybe, Aditya, let's speak about that sense of humanity that was core with him, and why was it unique to him or unique to so few people? Why wasn't everyone a savior?
Well, that's a very good question, but also a difficult one, based on Oskar Schindler's story, trying to search for this moment that changed his behavior. You know, you can realize that he was certainly shocked when he saw the deportations from the ghetto in Krakow. So suddenly he could see these people who used to work for his factory, who were in danger, whose life was threatened. He saw human tragedy. And later on, when the ghetto in Krakow was liquidated, he was even more devastated by the human tragedy. So it was one thing what he believed when it comes to politics and business, but it was also being sensitive to human life, humanity. And this was the moment that probably he decided to do a bit more to the people who were working for him. So I think it took a lot of courage, a lot of determination that he succeeded in saving his workers. At the same time, when he started to organize the subcamp of Płaszów in or around his factory, there were other German and Austrian businessmen who had small studios, workshops, factories in Krakow, and Oskar Schindler was talking to them. Let's save these workers, and they were saying, yes, let's do that. We want to help, but they were not determined enough. They were not courageous enough. They were not focused on that enough to be successful. That's why he was the only one who really managed to save his workers, and he established personal relations with many of them. That's also what made his efforts to save the Jews even more successful, because he had the group of people, his core team, who was running the factory for him. They were his advisors, but without his permission, without his involvement, nothing was possible. I mean, he really risked his career, he really risked his business, he risked his position when he was bribing, for example, the commandant of Płaszów camp, Amon Get, who was as cruel as hell, to send his workers, Oskar Schindler's workers, to the factory. He was bribing the officials in Krakow to allow his workers to be to work in his factory. So he was getting benefits from his factory, but he also used part of these benefits to save people. And that was something really special.
Tali, you must have looked at this issue of what makes a savior, what is it within a human that actually allows them to take that courageous step. Have you found any common threads between the 27,000 people that you spoke about who are considered the righteous amongst the nations?
It's a very difficult question, and many researchers are looking at these issues, and many books were written about exactly what you are asking, because many of them were very different. Some came and did it for religious reasons, others did it for values, others did it for adventure. But I will never forget the words of Dr. Paldiel, that was one of the first to head the Righteous Amongst the Nation department at Yad Vashem. And he said, many times it was just that human connection that Edita is speaking about. It's someone knocking at your door, Howard, looking in your eyes and say, please help me. I am desperate, please help me. And looking at that person and seeing the human being, maybe seeing that person with a little child and you yourself have a child, and basically saying, you are the same as me, and I'm going to do this for you. Now, it doesn't mean that people did it. I mean, only 27,000 are recognized. Let's say even 10 times more did it that maybe died or were never recognized. So let's say you have 150,000 people that did it. But in Europe, you had 200 million people, at least. And those 200 million people saw everything happening day in, day out, and still chose not to do, may it be for fear or someone else will do it. And that's why education institutions such as ours is so important, because in the end, it is about education, and it is about, really connecting to the values of being an upstander and choosing to be there for each other. And we know it even through the pandemic, how we need to be here for our community, for South Africa, for people that are in need, and not to say someone else will do it. We have to do it. And I think this is the lesson, and the big lesson that needs to be learned from this.
Aditya, we're going to come back to you in a little while during question time, but in the interim, Tali, I heard you tell the story, and you said in every story there are victims, there are perpetrators, and there's a third thing that's required, and that is bystanders.
Absolutely. And most people are bystanders. We know that. We know that it is by being a bystander, you never help the victim. You always, in a way, help the perpetrator by not doing anything. And of course, from the story of Sugihara and from the story of Schindler, just 2 of the 27,000 stories, you see the impact when you are not a bystander, when you are an upstander, when you resist, what is happening around you. The impact is huge. The families, I would not be alive, like Rabbi Goldman, I would not be alive here without the action of Oskar Schindler. So we must be aware of the fact that we are bystanders, and we need to move to action all the time.
So Tali, Khoni G in fact sent us an a cappella version of the Schindler tune. The one that I used during the video that I showed you earlier was in fact Yitzhak Perlman playing the violin of the Schindler tune. But there's an a cappella version as well that Khoni has sent us that we'd love to just spend a moment just to see.
Thank you.
Amen.
Tali, 1994 was a remarkable year because those of us in South Africa celebrated wildly as the advent of democracy took place in South Africa in April 1994. But we almost didn't realize that not far away from us in Rwanda, in fact, a very different history was busy unfolding. A genocide was taking place in Rwanda at the same time as us going to the polls. And I sat one day in a hall, and sitting directly in front of me was President Paul Kagame of Rwanda. And Bill Clinton was talking, and suddenly Clinton stopped. And he looked up and he stared at Kagame, who was in literally the seat in front of me. And he said, here in the presence of President Paul Kagame, I want to apologize. He said, a genocide happened on my watch and 800,000 people were massacred, mainly Tutsis, in Rwanda, and it only ever was discussed once in the White House. We thought it wasn't important enough. And 800,000 people died on my watch. And said Clinton, this will forever be the greatest blot on my presidency. I think many of us in South Africa do not understand what took place during the 1994 genocide of primarily Hutus in Rwanda. Sorry, of Tutsis in Rwanda. And we want to show just a very short little clip of exactly what took place.
Between April and July of 1994, up to 800,000 people, mostly from the Tutsi minority group, were killed. Individuals like Damas Gasimba were caught up in a mass murder campaign, centrally planned by the Rwandan government. Pitting neighbor against neighbor, they demonized and targeted the Tutsi minority and any Hutu who resisted their plans. The outside world turned away while the genocide continued week after week. In spite of increasing violence, Gasimba refused to abandon his beliefs. He turned his orphanage with a capacity of 60 into a sanctuary for some 400 children and adults.
At its height, we were hiding some 400 people there. The militias arrived each time. They were coming all the time, every day in fact, and I was there to try to stop them from entering. They asked the kids to split into two groups, the Hutus on one side and the Tutsis on the other. But the children, as I had always told them, they were one. They should be united. They didn't want to separate. And it was difficult for the militia to distinguish between them, as they didn't know them. They would look at their faces, but kids' faces can sometimes look alike. They tried again many times, but the children kept refusing, acting like real brothers. There were roadblocks all over the city. They were every 100 meters or so. There were so many bodies from the carnage, from the massacres, that they were even doing roadblocks with the piles of bodies. Carl Wilkins introduced himself to me. He had heard of an orphanage with children in danger who had nothing. Then I explained our situation to him.
Carl Wilkins, perhaps the only American relief worker to stay in Rwanda throughout the genocide, saw his mission to help those in need.
He managed to find milk and water.
One day in late June 1994, Gasimba left the orphanage to look for supplies. That same day, Wilkins arrived with barrels of water and found the orphanage swarming with militia. Their leader was just getting out of his car.
I walked over, put my hand out, he brushes right past me. He goes to the young brother, and where's the director? He starts, we want the director. And I could pick up occasionally, he'd throw in a French word or so, and then he gets back in his car and he storms off. And the brother tells me, they really want to kill my my older brother today. In fact, they're going to kill all of us.
Fearing the worst, Wilkins stayed as long as he could. A few hours later, while the orphanage was still under siege, a group of 7 policemen arrived. They advised Wilkins to speak with senior governmental leaders about the fate of the orphanage.
The young brother said, no, don't go. They're going to kill us as soon as you leave. And I said to him, you know, I promised him. I promised them I'll come back. And so it was with this sick mixture of relief and dread that I got in my car and drove away.
Wilkins knew he had to seek help from the most senior Rwandan government official possible. By a stroke of luck, the Prime Minister was in town.
I stood up and I stepped into the middle of the hallway and I put my hand out and I said, Mr. Prime Minister, I'm Carl Wilkins, the director of ADRA. And he stopped and looked at me. Yes, I know you. I've heard of your work. How's your work going? And I said, well, actually, Mr. Prime Minister, it's not going well at all. I said, I just left the orphans surrounded by militia and I feel there's going to be a massacre. What else do you say but the truth and what it is? And he stopped and he conferred a little bit with someone in his group, and he looked back at me and he says, actually, I'm aware of that situation and your orphans will be fine. We will see that they're cared for.
In a country where murder had become commonplace, those at the orphanage survived another night without an attack.
Fortunately, the next day I was told that everyone was still alive. It was a bit of a relief, but I feared that even if they had not died that night, something might happen during the day. Fortunately, after 3 days had passed, they came to where I was at Saint-Michel.
As evacuees from the orphanage arrived at the cathedral, the militias were shocked to see so many adults among the orphans.
All of the militias that were there came by. Where did these people come from? They're with Gasimba? Who is this Gasimba? Are you Gasimba? Yes, that's me. What are all these people? They're with me. What's the problem?
The hundreds of children and adults that Damas Gasimba had cared for since the beginning of the genocide were rescued on July 1st, 1994.
And we must teach our children only good. Give them a good education. And finally, we must banish hatred. That's all.
It's such a great pleasure to welcome Carl Wilkins, who joins us now from the United States. Carl, if we can ask you to turn on your video.
Hey, Howard, thanks so much. Tali, so good to see you.
Oh, wonderful to see you.
So, Carl, how did you land up in Rwanda and when did you go?
We actually moved there 4 years before the genocide. I had come to Africa, actually South Africa was my first experience on the continent back in 1978. And after graduating as a high school shop teacher, teaching auto mechanics, welding and stuff in 80, we lived, my new bride and I moved to Zimbabwe, later Zambia. And in 90, we moved to Rwanda. Actually was looking at this picture the other day. It's kind of hard to believe that that's the same guy back in 1990, and our young family moved to Kigali, Rwanda, where we were doing development, as you mentioned, Abe, we're building schools, operating clinics. Funny enough, for many people, it's hard to think of Rwanda as anything other than genocide, but it was a great place to raise our kids. We just were really grateful to be living in this beautiful little, tropical paradise in many ways. Kigali's like a mile above sea level. Temperatures are in the 70s year round. Yeah, no idea what was ahead of us.
So when did you first get a sense that trouble was brewing, that things were going to start getting really difficult there?
Well, it's interesting how it kind of comes on bit by bit. 6 months after we got there in 1990, a war started. Boom. That was not bit by bit. That was a big thing. Many of the Tutsi people who had fled the country at the time of independence around the early 60s, late 50s, wanted to come home, couldn't, and finally got organized as a military, and the Rwandan Patriotic Front came back in the fall of 1990. And then we learned to live kind of with this war. 91, 92, 93, a ceasefire happened, and we were all super optimistic. We're going to finally have peace in this tiny little country. And the UN came and said, way to go, Rwanda. You've done a great job. Yeah, we're here with you. They sent UN soldiers in the fall of 93. But the new government from the peace agreement was never launched. All kinds of people throwing, spoke in the wheel, a wrench in the works, something. Anyway, and by the time April 93 rolled around, the tensions had really grown a lot. Actually, in March, I sent a fax back in the day, sent a fax to the world headquarters. I was working with the Adventist Church, telling them that it's like we're sitting on a keg of dynamite here, but we're still hoping. We're still hoping. So if tomorrow, the news reports that Rwanda has exploded, we do have an evacuation plan in place. We aren't, this is not catching us by surprise, although the scale and the depth and even the amount of preparation and everything before was just more than any of us had imagined. So when the president's plane was shot down April 6th, the Rwandan president's plane was shot down April 6th, 1994, the planners of the genocide, it's really interesting. Just a small group of men and women who planned this genocide. They used that shooting down, that event of the president's plane being shot down, which till today is disputed, no hard evidence who did that. We all have our theories, but they used that event to launch this horrific thing that we all call genocide, this neighbor turning on neighbor, this kind, ordinary, gracious, give you the shirt off the back people somehow transitioning to neighbor killers. Yeah.
Carl, before we get on to the actual explosion and how it began, ethnically, there is no real difference between Hutus and Tutsis, is there? It was a colonial construct.
Yeah. They, I think I've got an ID card here somewhere. Well, okay, it's not in this. Yeah, there it is. There was, unfortunately, throughout history, it seems like we've been fixated on the tone of the color of people's skin, and Tutsi people traditionally were lighter skinned or taller, more cattle lifestyle people. Hutu people more agriculture. Stay right here. Let's farm this land. Shorter, darker, maybe, but that didn't come between people. By and large, the Hutu and Tutsi people married each other all the time. I mean, you're speaking the same language. You're not divided by religion. A little bit of work division, and then of course economic division. But no, you're absolutely right. The planners of the genocide had to work hard to break the bonds that was between these group of, at that time about 7 million people, and roughly 11-12% of them in the Tutsi category. But these ID cards introduced by the Belgians are definitely part of the story of us and them, the developing of the us and them mentality, the polarization on the pathway to harm really has, now you look at it, quite a clear delineated pathway, this polarization, this us and them.
So you're telling us the story, the presidential jet is downed, and there's a dehumanization that begins. How is this genocide going to unfold?
Well, really quick. It's gonna like other genocides, the Holocaust happening within the context of a war, seeming like our ideas of the value of life and killing, and that we'll solve something by killing people, that becomes a predominant part of our thinking. That our world will be better without somebody. In fact, that's the one that I pop up when I get chances to talk with students. I'm always popping this one on the screen. Genocide stems from thinking, and I don't even like to read the last part of the line, from thinking that says my world would be better without you in it. So the planners of the genocide have been working largely through radio, but this does have a long history. Desegregation, quota system in education and stuff. The us and them has that history, but the radio is going to be really powerfully used. Comedians, musicians. It's like, I often like to pop this picture up on the screen. My friend, a man who had a Hutu ID card protecting more than 40 people in his home. His neighbors also have Hutu ID cards, and they're ordered to kill the people in his home. The radio was playing these messages against the Tutsi people, and I kind of make it like metaphorical bricks are flying through the air, the radio waves, you know, and you get this message, and it says on it something negative about the Tutsi. And some people, critical thinking, they just chucked it aside and said, no, that's not true. But other people, oh, wait a minute, maybe a little bit. And bit by bit, they would use those metaphorical bricks to build a wall between them and the neighbor, so that soon they don't even see the face of their neighbor. That's why I appreciated earlier when Tali said, you know, something breaks through that and they see the humanity. And as a point, a change point, a tipping point where somebody does do something for somebody else, perhaps even at great risk of their lives. And my friend Gasikwa had been chucking bricks aside, no wall. And when the neighbors come to kill the people in his house, he says, hey, Bernard, talking to one of the neighbors, your kids must be hungry, huh? You want a chicken? And this idea of seeing, you know, I look at this and I see, here come the killers, Gasikwa. Gasikwa looks at them and he says, no, they're my neighbors. I'm like, well, what do you mean? They're the enemy. No, he says, that's a father. And that act of kindness on his part, in the midst, you asked how it was launching and playing out, is super complex, and every person has a choice and a decision as they're listening to the radio coming in. And that radio, unfortunately, I was listening, of course, with great interest. I mean, your whole program, thanks. Sugihara, I got to visit Lithuania and go to a memorial there, and his story is always, I want the story of Sugihara's wife, huh? You see the picture of his wife and children. And these stories, these choices, they all have many people that are playing a part into the choices that we make. And so in Rwanda, the plane will be shot down Wednesday night. And by Friday, all of the Americans, along with the other embassies, are saying, we're out of here. And by Sunday night, most all of the foreigners will be gone. And then the killing will just continue at unimaginable rates, 15, 20,000 people I hate to say those statistics, in a day. And by the time July 4 comes and the Rwandan Patriotic Front ends, these refugee soldiers I mentioned earlier, by the time they come and end the genocide, drive the planners of the genocide out of power, out of the country, more than 1 million people will be killed.
So there are choices, but people would think the United Nations is there. The United Nations have forces there. People must have believed the UN was there to protect them.
Yeah. It was like one of the biggest tragedies. I mean, I don't know. How do we categorize or measure the tragedies of a time like, but this was definitely this false, huge tragedy, this false sense of security that the UN gave their 2,500 soldiers, these vehicles with the black letters all over them. It was an incredible tragedy. And if you start to zero in on that story and you start to look at General Dallaire, the Canadian who was in charge, and the wrestling match he was having with Kofi Annan, who at the time at the UN was in charge, he wasn't Secretary General then, he was in charge of peacekeeping affairs. And you start to look at the individual choices of all of these people. When the UN says, no, we didn't go there to be peacekeepers, we went there to be observers. Well, man, with their tanks and armored personnel carrier, they gave a very different message. And that message, no doubt, cost the lives of thousands and thousands of people who would have done like most people do in times of fear and tragedy, run. But in this case, no, it's going to be okay. The UN is here. So that's one segment of the enormously tragic story there in Rwanda.
But Carl, you too had a choice. You could have left. You had an evacuation plan. Why did you choose to stay?
You know, so much in life comes down to family, huh? and then when family is taken away, or perhaps you're born in a situation where family is a destructive force in your life, not an affirming, nurturing force in your life. I was super fortunate. I mean, right down, this picture is probably a week before the genocide. Huh? My mom and dad are visiting at the time. You can see Teresa and I and our 3 children, Mindy, 10, Lisa, 7, Sean, 5. We've been there already for 4 years in the country. Mom and dad happened to be visiting just before the genocide. And when the American embassy says, we're leaving, everybody, and we're not going to fly out, the president's plane was just shot down. I think it's a good idea to drive out. We'll drive to Burundi, but don't bring any Rwandans. Well, in our case, our family had grown. It wasn't just Teresa and the children and I, but a young lady who came, lived and worked at our home for more than 3 years, loved on our kids. I think a lot of people who are with us tonight will, around the globe, when somebody loves on your kids, that's one of the fastest way to become family. This young man came in the evening as the watchman. They both had Tutsi ID cards. So I can't begin to explain the choice to stay without giving you this context that it was very much about family. And these 2 people had enlarged and enriched our family. Got that? Not just enlarged, but had enriched our family. When somebody, like I said, loves on your kids, and they, to us, very much represented the people of Rwanda. So you know, this 36-year-old guy and his, I think Teresa, you know, she hadn't had her birthday yet. She was 34. We went in the bedroom and, so I'm talking about myself, third person nonsense. We went in the bedroom and we talked and we prayed and we just said, hey, we can't leave those 2 people to be killed. The Rwandans had given us so much privilege, so much, they treated us like royalty as foreigners. Maybe we could use that privilege to help these 2 young people. And fortunately, they will survive, but that will be at the beginning of it. But of course, I was listening with a lot of interest as you were asking, Tali, about you know, these choices and why don't more people do? And I asked myself those questions too. But I think one of the things that came to my mind as you were talking about that was this concept of obedience to authority. Huh? You saw Sugihara, he tried 3 times and he was told no, no, no. But he decided empathy and humanity as opposed to obedience to authority. Now, that idea of empathy and humanity, I think, is in every single human. So we had people in Rwanda being ordered by their government to kill, and they were doing it. But we had other people, like my friend Gasikwa, who were just saying, no, that's nonsense. Humanity, empathy. And so this going against, same with Schindler and you know, in our personal experience, the organization I was working for, the American government, the US Embassy said, no, you don't have a choice, you have to leave. And I, you know, when I finally said, no, I'm a private citizen and I'm not leaving, they said, okay, then write on a piece of paper that you've refused the help of the United States government to leave Rwanda. I think this is something, you know, so many times, Howard, we try to make life easier by saying, come on, you know, to our kids, just do what I said, will you? You know, if you people will just cooperate, and we won't have encouraged conversations. It's encouraging conversations about difficult topics. For me right now, yes, some statues should come down on our globe, on our planet and stuff, but not without conversations. We've got to have conversations about these things so that we understand more of the context, more of the background. So we're making choices both with our head and our heart. Okay, wait, I already went into another subject without being asked, so back to you.
So Carl, this wasn't a sophisticated genocide. This wasn't gas chambers and trucks. These were people with machetes and what we call in South Africa, knobkerries. This is neighbor against neighbor. You're living in the middle of this. This all erupts.
Yeah. You know, not sophisticated in that you're right. There weren't gas chambers. Most of it was done with machetes and clubs, and then some weapons, some grenades. But it was, is sophisticated the word we want to use? How do you get, this is where we struggle so much, and this is my little teaching aid here, my little lamb here. How do you get kind, generous, ordinary people to turn from generous to murderers? And then afterwards, which is a big part, and tonight we're not going to have time for that part, but can these people who've become murderers ever be trusted again? So what is that? Because no matter what, the guns, the gas chambers, all of the things, it's still human choices. And so what is the strategy that can turn seemingly good people? We know the stories of the Nazi, they're exterminating people during the day, and they're reading stories to the kids and put them to bed at night. How is it that kind of stuff can happen? And I think that for me, it is this idea. I've actually kind of made a little. I'm a visual learner. I was a shop teacher, auto mechanics, welding. I like to see physical stuff. But I think the story of Rwanda and what you're talking about is so much about when everything falls apart. Then the question, how do we put it back together? But the falling apart part is this part right here. And no matter what strategy we use on this pathway to harm, this is you guys will probably, I know Tali will recognize this, Erwin Staub and his work in the continuum of violence and stuff is where those ideas are coming from for me. But on this pathway to harm, on good ordinary people becoming murderers, this idea of polarizing, it may not be super technical by many terms. In Rwanda, it was a radio, largely the radio, then using the religious structure in the country, which should have been something that would have stood against genocide, but instead they were able to use the religious structure, able to use the educational structure. So using what's there, but on this goal, which sometimes is subtle and sometimes is not so subtle, to polarize. And of course, if we were spending more time today, we'd start up the other side. What does this one look like? And you in South Africa, oh my goodness. Like I was listening to our friend Brian Stevenson the other day, and he's saying how, the processes that have happened in South Africa, flaws and successes in terms of healing, Rwanda, Germany. In America, though, he says, we've never faced our past. And that's one of the reasons we're struggling like we are now. We haven't had that truth telling that we need so much for our history.
So Carl, you're living in Rwanda. There are literally piles of bodies all around you. People are being massacred every single day. And you don't just bunker down or hunker down. You go out to see how you can help. What went through your mind? Your family must have thought you were insane.
I'm glad you mentioned my family, because my wife, we got to talk every single day on the radio. She took the kids to safety and I stayed. She was in Nairobi. We were able to talk on these HF radios. She was like rock solid throughout the whole time. Other family members, they're not anybody with I look back at it now, and I'm like, what in the world, was I thinking at that time? But when people are in front of you, and you see the opportunity. I'm not a big fan of this word responsibility. It gets thrown around often like a hot potato. Who's responsible? I love to cut it in half and flip it over. Ability to respond. When I shift from thinking of whose responsibility is this to my ability to respond, for me, things start getting exciting. And so, yes, for people on the outside, it looked like insanity. But for those of us who were in the middle of it, we were looking for ways that we could make a difference. And none of this, I would love to, as we spend more time with the stories of Sugihara or of Schindler and the stories in Rwanda, we realize, there may be one person at this point making a choice, but there's a whole circle of other people that are part of that choice and that are enabling that choice. Even the idea of courage, I say, is contagious. Fear we know is contagious, but courage is, and I had tons of maybe not tons, but I did have enough examples of courage around me at the moment, and then examples of courage in my head from books, from you know, the family in Holland who was protecting this Jewish family, or from the French underground, or from the Underground Railroad. I had those stories in my mind, and that courage is what I think, that contagious nature of courage helps us as we then start to look for allies. How can we make a difference? And of course, Damas, I loved seeing Damas, especially the young version of Damas there in the film that you showed. And in fact, every summer when I go back to Rwanda, I get to meet up with Damas and his family. And this last summer, in fact, this is a young, this might be 2 summers ago. Yeah, but this is a young man who was a little kid at the orphanage at that time. And now Rwanda has closed its orphanages, and once kids in people's homes, they've gone to more of a foster-like care system. But the orphanage today, there's a school on the property and an after-school program. And this young fella who was a little kid in the orphanage of 94 is now, I believe he's teaching music in the after-school program. And so Damas was a really natural ally, which I think we all look for, people who kind of have this obvious compassion and empathy. But then in the story that you relate in that little film, there were the unnatural allies, huh? When I go to the colonel's office, like the mayor of the city, and the secretary says, the prime minister's here, ask him to help. Then you start entering into a whole nother level of allies, because now we're looking for allies among the, quote, enemy, which really is a game changer for me, at least, in terms of, oh no, my allies in this situation are going to be people who think like me, talk like me, look like me or something. No, in certain situations, maybe for 5 minutes, maybe for an hour, somebody who might be in the category of enemy could be an ally. And so that idea of getting out, yeah, for many people, they can say insanity or something, but no, day to day, our ability to respond, finding allies, inspiration of the courage of others. Those are some of the things, when I reflect back on it, that do kind of untangle the craziness and say, yeah, that expression, one day at a time, one moment at a time, that's not just, a cliche. That's survival.
So Carl, take us through that story. You arrive at the orphanage. It seems quite evident the kids are going to be murdered. Everyone's going to be murdered. And at that moment, you decide you're going to try do something. Walk us through that entire story in your own words.
Okay. These are some sketches from a little 40-minute film, which, because we do get to travel to schools and share these stories, this is the film we usually send ahead of time. But in brief, we got there just minutes before these guys with their machine guns and their clubs. And as they materialized around the orphanage, you can just feel your heart, your throat closing up. You feel your heart just starting to pound out of your chest. And when the leader came in his little green Mercedes, no doubt stolen green Mercedes station wagon, and the cloud of dust cleared, he got out of his car, and I tried to shake hands. No, there was none of it. He went to the young brother of Damas, and as you heard in the story, they have this exchange. We have a standoff that's going to be, it's hard to say whether it was 2 or 3. I know it was at least 2 hours and probably not longer than 3 hours, but really hard to keep track of time in moments of trauma and horror like that. But what was so crazy and became clear really quick was they weren't coming in. They had encircled the orphanage, and they're standing there with their machine guns, their camo jacket, maybe different colored bandanas around their heads. Each of their the killing squads kind of had their own forms of identity, and sometimes different political parties, different colors and stuff, but they weren't coming in, and it just wasn't making sense. When they, as I've looked back on it, I know there was that old ingrained feeling of respect for foreigners that we often saw in Rwanda. How much of that was playing into it? I had a relationship with the colonel who was in charge of the city. And so they're ordered on one hand to do this killing. On the other hand, one of the guys from one of your top people is standing here. I mean, a guy with a relationship with your top colonel in the city is standing here in the middle. There's some confusion. And here's one that I'd like to interject that I know maybe pretty idealistic, but it's worth it from my perspective. I would like to say that not every single one of these guys with machine guns was at the same level of convinced to kill. We had the same, if we had, strange as it might sound, if we had like a want to kill meter, that want to kill meter wouldn't have read the same as you pointed at each different person in this thing. So I like to think that sometimes people just needed a little something to push them back from the edge they had gone over. And so why, I don't know completely, but those are a few ideas. They didn't come in. Finally, through the help of Philip Gaillard, a Swiss man who, you look him up in that documentary, Ghost of Rwanda, he's a very powerful figure during this time. He stayed throughout the genocide with the Red Cross there. Philip got a hold of the police, and so these 7 gendarmes, as we called them, showed up, and the leader just basically says, you need to go get help. And I'm like, no, wait a minute, because police had been involved in the killing before, and I'm thinking they just want to get rid of me, and this is another strategy. But as I looked at him, and I've thought about this often, did he come to kill or did he come to protect? Did my trusting him, did his coming here and seeing the situation, was my presence a tipping point that pushed him back from the edge or not? Because we know it can just be that much of a moment of a choice, and we have a horror, a massacre that happens, or we have one stopped. And I don't know, but I think it's worth just thinking about those different ideas in their minds and what their goals were and what they got, to see the story from his perspective. I think that's what, you understand well in South Africa, is that in this truth telling, we've got to see all of the perspectives to try to understand and appreciate each other. So in any case, I don't envy this guy, because he's surrounded by 50 guys, and now he and his 6 other policemen are kind of holding the fort. I will go to the colonel's office, and that's where, as I mentioned earlier, the secretary will say, I don't know what to do here. The colonel was out. He's the guy I had a relationship. He was out of town, but she says, whoa, the prime minister's here. And I'm like, well, they had killed the prime minister the day after the president's plane was shot down, the extremist. And now they put in their own guy as prime minister. And she's telling me to ask him this just makes no sense, but I'm desperate. And as you heard, I stuck my hand out when he came out of the office he was meeting in, introduced myself, and said, no, I think there's going to be a massacre. And that would be probably a topic of another time as to why he did it, why he stopped the massacre. I think it was connected to Operation Turquoise. For some of the folks who are here with us this evening that understand Rwanda's story deeper, I think he wanted to use those orphans as justification to bring French soldiers to the center of Rwanda. They were already on the western side, and Operation Turquoise is a whole nother story. But the point here is he stopped the massacre. I don't think it was my eloquence, but I do think it had to do with my presence. But it wasn't just me alone. Wouldn't have even thought of it had it not been her. Wouldn't have even been there had it not been for the lieutenant who was back at the orphanage holding the fort. Wouldn't have seen that lieutenant if it hadn't have been for Philip at the Red Cross who contacted the police. So I'm trying to put together the network that these choices that happen there, it's not like we love to make movies out of one-man hero stories. And I understand that. I understand the desire we all have, but that's not how life usually works. And even though it might be one person who makes an initial choice, and that should be recognized and we should study them, but then that becomes the inspiration for the person who is about to and didn't want to be alone. And so those networks are just incredibly important during this time, which your question that opened this little section here of the craziness or the insanity it appeared to doing. It was those networks, that ability to respond, that I would say were crucial to the things we were able to do together. And it was always we were able to together.
Carl, you're a man of faith, so I'm sure you know the story of Queen Esther.
Oh, yeah.
when the Jews of Persia are about to be all killed, and the queen goes to King Ahasuerus, and she puts herself before
this.
The story you're telling is a repeat of the story of Esther, and ultimately the Jews of Persia are saved. You are the Esther of your own biblical story. It is just such an honor and privilege to listen to you tonight. I'm going to bring in Tali again now, because Tali, when you decided to build the Johannesburg Holocaust Center, you didn't just build a Holocaust Center, you built a Holocaust and Genocide Center, and you wanted to tell the story of Rwanda in that center as well.
Absolutely, and Carl, thank you so much. Carl was with us in October at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and it's inspiring and continues to be inspiring. So why, when the late Gerald Leisner and myself started this project, you know, all those years ago, in 2008, to create a center of dialogue, of lessons for humanity, of education, of memory. Me as a second generation, but someone that goes to Rwanda for the past 20 years, that is very close to the Rwandan people. Why was it important, I thought, to do just that? Because of course, when my father walked out of Brunlitz and started to rebuild his life, he, like everyone else, said, never again, never again. But the never again, as we all know, is never again until the next time and the next time. And here in South Africa, learning from the Holocaust, that is the most documented genocide, no doubt, of the 20th century, I really felt that we cannot ignore that point that you said, Howard, about April 1994, 2 countries in Africa choosing such different paths. South Africa, I'm remembering that day when I'm voting at about 9:30 at night, you know, standing the whole day so happy, yet 3.5 hours away from us. Kigali, Johannesburg is 3.5 hours flight. And there in April, thousands and thousands and thousands were already murdered. And we didn't know. And we cannot say that we don't know. And in our center, where school children are coming and teachers are coming and the public is coming, we cannot stop in 1945. We have to connect to genocide that happened after the never again. And people like Carl, that nowadays is teaching all around the world and came to us as well, are so important in making those connections that we can hopefully see the warning signs and prevent the next genocide. We're not very good at it, sadly, but we can certainly try and educate for that.
Tali, I think the one thing that you've taught me is that we all have choices in life. And Absolutely. We have, and it's important to make sure that we are educated enough to be able to make those correct choices. We've probably just got a few minutes left. We've gone a little over, but the stories have been so remarkable, so inspiring and so riveting tonight that I hope people don't mind that we've gone a little over time. We are hoping to finish by 10 o'clock. We will finish within the next 10 minutes or so, but if anyone has a question for any of the panelists, we've got Carl, we've got Aditya, we've got Doron, we've got Rabbi Goldman, we've got Tali, all on the panel. So if you have a question for any of them, please feel free. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please use it. And we have so many questions coming in. Tali, this is the most bizarre question, but everyone wants to know if you're related to Moshe Natus.
Absolutely. I just answered. Absolutely. Clive, my husband. And the reason that I arrived in South Africa and stayed here and love this country is Moshe Natus, Dr. Moshe Natus, was his great uncle. And we were very, very close. He died, of course, at the age of 108. So my husband has hopefully very good genes.
So, Carl, there's a question that's come in because Rwanda has become one of the great success stories of Africa. What is it that the Rwandese did? What was their reconciliation process? What did they do to be able to build so successfully on this remarkable tragedy in order to create great success in the nation? Is it an issue of leadership? Is it President Kagame? What is it that's made them unique?
Yeah, good. I will, because we do just a couple minutes. So absolutely, leadership is the first thing that comes to my mind, but leadership alone can't happen. It's got to be a team, and the team of people that President Kagame has brought together, and then the strategy. And in quick little nutshell, Rwanda decided that at the beginning, they had this, they reached back in their history and this idea of gacaca. We can't try these thousands of people by modern normal standards. Get the community together and have truth telling. That truth telling of gacaca, really, really a big part, where people on Thursday afternoon would come to the soccer field. There were already people, this is from your center, Tali, you'll recognize that photo. The people from that you trust in your community are trained as gacaca, I'll use the word judges. And then in front of the community, they're confessing what they did. From that, they started into the next thing where they call them Tige camps in Rwanda, but this is basically a place to reinvent yourself. I have defined myself now as a killer. How can I reinvent myself? Doing projects for the community here. Some people might think it's a prison camp until you get there. There's no fence, no walls, and the guards don't have guns. So restorative justice, a huge buy-in for that part. And the last part is this idea of, well, this is too complex for the moment here, but it's the idea of going home, having a safe, secure environment where we can have shared experiences together and start to film. What I skipped over was neural pathways, that we can start to build new pathways as we define this person. We don't just fire that one pathway. Okay, I'll go back to it. That one thing thinking. We get past this idea of this is how they're defined by the worst thing that they ever did in their life. We're not going to forget it, but we're going to commit ourselves to understanding that there's much more than the worst thing we've done in our life. And that opportunity to build new pathways in our mind, that does start with leadership, a team that they're surrounded by. Rwanda, I can't not say this, the role of women and the empowerment of women in the restorative process. Those are all parts and keys to this idea. And then people among the community. I love the picture of Maria. People in the community who lead the way. After losing so much, they still decide my life will not be defined by everything I lost. My life will be defined by what I do next. And you have incredible stories of reconciliation, even with the people who are part of taking the lives of your family members. And that's not fair to just say it in just a few seconds like that. But I can't not talk about the inspiration and the hope that survivors give us, that we don't have to be defined by everything we lost. Yes, that is a defining point in our life. And no, we will not minimize that. That's super important. But what do we do next is what I found from Rwanda to be such a challenging and inspiring question. What do we do next?
So I want to actually ask Aditya, Doron, Rabbi Goldman, I want to ask the question is, what do we do to keep the memories of these people alive? What do we do to make sure that the stories of these remarkable heroes are told and ingrained in our society today? One of the questions that came in quite earlier was from Jeff Zarel, who asked Rabbi Goldman, he said there was a memorial forest built to Sugihara that was in fact paved over, and an apartment building was built over a memorial forest. So what do we do to make sure that those things don't happen and these stories live within each of us? Rabbi Goldman, can we start with you maybe?
Yeah, so in Israel, there's quite a few places that have been named for Chuni Sugihara. There are streets. I know Netanya has a street, the Sugihara Street, Rehov Sugihara, whatever. There's a number of monuments and tributes and all kinds of things in different parts of the world. I've written about it. My story of meeting Nabucco was featured prominently in the Jewish Report last year. And I've written about it elsewhere. I speak about it. And I'm hoping to bring Nabucco here so that South Africans can be very, very familiar with it. We all have to do our part. For me, the bottom line really, I mean, of this whole evening is that just reaffirming that old Talmudic famous statement, he who saves a single soul has saved the entire world. And if we can just reflect on the gratitude, you know, people, we use the words eternally grateful. You know, we use it almost flippantly. Here, you're talking about thousands and thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of people alive today because of one person, whether it's Sugihara or Schindler or people in Rwanda. And really, this is eternally grateful is something, something so meaningful and true here. So, you know, I think all of us who are touched have to keep telling the stories. Monuments alone are not going to do it.
Yeah, I think,
Doron?
you know, as I've been listening to the other panelists, these are all extraordinary. We're talking about extraordinary people and heroes. There's a whole other evening here for another time about the survivors. To what degree are they exceptional people? Or is it just a matter of luck that they had the good fortune to be next to a hero? And I was thinking of my aunt and uncle, my cousin's grandparents during this evening. And I thought that while I was growing up, once we were here in America, we wound up after all these years of going through continents and wars and everything, winding up living in two homes in Brooklyn, just about, you know, 20 feet or 30 feet or meters from each other. And these were people that I got to know as ordinary people. Never during the time that I grew up did it occur to me to ask all the questions that right now we are doing through internet research, through finding remnants and documents and putting the dots together. And I'm thinking, these were ordinary people. They sent their kids to school. They went to my high school graduation. They gave a little gift. We got together for Shabbat. And these are people that went through this unbelievable story, because once they went to Sugihara to get the visa, what is it that set them apart from thousands of others who never even sought these visas? I mean, the desperate search to go from Vilna to Kovno, to stand outside in the hope that you may get one of these things, already in some way set apart these people. And this is a quality about my aunt and uncle that I would never have guessed. And then they come back to Vilna on the same road that we drove that day, and they have this visa, and the Germans might be coming in any day, and they've got to take houses that their families have lived in for generations and leave almost immediately if they can get a ticket from Russia on the train. So I'm thinking, what would I have done? How much extra courage and strength and risk-taking does it take for those people who even sought the visas from Sugihara and fortunately found such a hero of our times? And then after that, the years and years of going through Siberia and through Japan and through China and India. And yet, when I met them, if you had asked me, were these heroes, were these extraordinary people, would the person sitting right next to you right now or yourself be capable of doing this? I don't know the answer. But it does tell you that there are amazing people walking amongst us, and they seem very ordinary. I just say one more thing. I mentioned the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. where that meeting with Sugihara's son took place. And I happen to have been involved in that in the 1980s when that was being established. I had a high position in city government, and I was on the board there that we were, putting this thing together. And originally the museum was called the New York City Holocaust Museum. And somewhere along the line, we felt uncomfortable with that, and it became the name it has now, the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And the reason for that was that the emphasis we thought should be not just on death, which is what Holocaust museums often, unfortunately, can be, but on life and on those who survived and on those who created a new life afterwards, both the Jewish life that existed in Eastern Europe before and the one that was to some degree recreated in the rest of the world. And those are the people whose stories we should tell. You asked before, how can we perpetuate it? So one way is to tell the incredible stories that you've heard today. And the other, I think, is to tell the stories of people who on the surface seem absolutely ordinary. And when you tell the stories that you've heard today, some of them actually become extraordinary. What qualities they have that allow them to survive, I don't know. But I know that they seemed very ordinary and they really were exceptional.
Thank you, Doron. Thank you for that beautiful message. Iditya, while we ask you to answer that question, I'm going to ask all of the people who are watching us, and we still have well over 2,000 people currently watching us, and we've been going for nearly 2.5 hours. So I'm just going to ask all of those people just to take a moment and reflect and write something in the comment section on what they learned tonight, what really resonated with them. Did the stories of heroism and of survival actually resonate with them or not? And we'd love to hear from all of you. If you could just post a little message in the comment section. Iditya, I think the one message that we have of Schindler is you don't have to be a saint to be a hero. You can be an ordinary human being, and that ordinary human being, and each single one of us, has the ability to do something special and to affect the lives of everyone around us.
Absolutely. You don't need to be a saint to be a hero. And also you cannot study or learn to be a hero, because sometimes the situation can make you a hero. So just a moment of decision can lead you in the path that you are becoming the hero. So it's something you cannot really study. You cannot really learn how to be a hero. You can learn how to be a decent person. You can learn how to be a righteous in various situations. But to be a hero, it needs the situation. But of course, to keep the memory of people like Oskar Schindler or Sugihara, we need to educate people. We need to tell the stories. We need to make sure that especially young people relate the stories to the current situations. It's not just a matter of the past. It's the matter of what is happening nowadays. And, when people think about righteous among the nations, about the heroes, they usually think big. That's something that happened during the war. That's something that happened in amazing circumstances. But in fact, to become a hero, you can help a person who is being beaten up in the street. When you react to anybody being attacked in the public space when nobody else is reacting, that's your opportunity to become the hero. We need to teach people that you have to react when others are being threatened. And I liked Carl's definition or his understanding of not responsibility, but ability to react. We all have ability to react, less or more. But when you have the ability to react, take your chance of do something positive. That's the message of all these stories, I think. And sometimes it requires to be disobedient to the authorities, to your supervisor, to someone who is around you, to your family. But you need to be focused on what you want to do, how you want to react. And what I have learned from the people who are recognized as the righteous among the nations, sometimes they are very lonely they were very lonely in their decision. To be a hero demanded not only the courage to fight the evil, to fight the enemy, but also to keep it very secret, or to keep it within the premises of their house, because they never, they couldn't trust the people around once they were helping others. So that's the story of the Holocaust, that sometimes to be a hero, it's not only fighting the enemy, but also to be aware that the enemy might grow up among your neighbors. So I think we cannot see the story as black and white. And again, I will make a reference to what was said in the context of Rwanda and Carl's story, that sometimes you look for an ally among the enemies. And it's surprising. It's not the black and white story. It's full of gray. And you have to be able to find yourself in this situation, but never lose the focus on helping others.
Carl, if I could ask you, to many, you are a genuine embodiment of what it means to be a real human and a hero. Does that embarrass you when people say that to you?
Well, I do tend to push back when I hear something like that, because, you know, as we've said this evening, these are choices, and sometimes it's just for a couple of minutes. You know, as I was looking at Sugihara's story, he was writing visas, was it for just the month of July and August primarily? I mean, that's not minimizing it all. That's huge. The guy, you know, more than what? He did more visas in a day than normally in a month, and 18 hours a day writing visas. I'm not all minimizing it, but what I think is important to understand is that these are things we can do right now within our sphere of influence, within our gift, what we have in our hands that we can do. And so I was inspired by people, and I have said to myself, okay, back off, don't push back on people so much. But it's wonderful to be part of a story like the story with Damas and the other people. And while I've been super inspired by so many people, some people can be inspired by the stories we were part of. Good.
Carl, thank you. Tali, what a remarkable evening we've had.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And Carl, you are so modest and I mean, no words to even describe. To have a rescuer, upstander amongst us is always an honor and a privilege. What an evening. Howard, thank you so much for the partnership. Thank you to Carl, Edita, Rabbi Goldman, and our surprise guest, Doron, for sharing such amazing stories and inspiring us to remember that we all can make a difference, and we can all make choices and make a difference in someone's life actually every day. And we know that in South Africa, and we know it now with our situation currently. Thank you again.
So Tali, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Just watching the remarkable comments coming in, and we will share your comments with all of the panelists, because if they ever thought that they had a reason to spend tonight with us, I think you will be inspired when you read the remarkable comments that so many hundreds and hundreds of people have actually posted into the comment section. So we'll be sending that all out to you, and you can understand the remarkable work that you've done tonight. A reminder that on Tuesday, we'll be talking about second passports, 8 p.m. The adverts will be going out tomorrow. Dan, if you can turn on your camera as well, a huge thank you to you.
Pleasure. Sure. No, what a privilege. What an absolute privilege. I mean, I've had goosebumps. I've had goosebumps here. Throughout. I mean, I started welling up. It's absolutely incredible what you all are doing, and thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, echo and thank you to Howie for Howie and Tali for putting this together. And yeah, the comments in the chat, I know that the audience can't see all of them, but they've just been flooding through. So absolutely amazing.
That's incredible. So we'll see you all again on Tuesday evening. And I've just asked Dan to play out once again with Connie G's version of Schindler that goes into Ani Ma'amin. And we'll play out with that. We'll see you all on Tuesday night. Thank you so much to everyone. We've had an audience that looks like about 3,000-4,000 people who've joined us this evening to watch this. So we're enormously grateful for you giving up your Saturday night to come listen to these remarkable, inspiring stories. So thank you to all of you. Good night. We'll see you on Tuesday.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Good night.
much.
Mashiach ani ma'amin bebias HaMashiach bebias HaMashiach ani ma'amin bebias HaMashiach bebias HaMashiach ani ma'amin bebias HaMashiach bebias HaMashiach ani ma'amin 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 bebi